All right, well, the Young Turks. Power panel time. You got it? Drop it.
I'm going to throw it away.
All right, we got a nice panel for you guys today. West Point Clark, Ben Mankiewicz, Johnny Pie. Cara Santa Maria will join us in the second hour, so that'll be interesting.
It's been a while.
Okay, so the government, by the way, in the second hour, we're going to talk about the Sony hack, has declared that it is North Korea, saying that Ben and I are wrong. That was in their official statement. Ben Mankiewicz and Jank are incorrect. It is North Korea. But wait. I have counter evidence in the second hour. I have counter evidence. Okay.
Good, I'm glad.
I really have to see this.
You think it's North Korea?
No, I think North Korea might have paid somebody. I think they may have a little tiny piece of it. I think it's, once the hack is out, everyone jumps in and, I mean, who's to say it's North Korea or a dog claiming to be North Korea?
If a dog can shoot someone, conceivably it could hack
Why
Sony.
couldn't it hack Sony?
Yeah, we've got that too in the second hour.
Okay, so that'll be interesting. And we've got plenty of great stuff in the first hour, obviously, and also, obviously, shop tyt.com.
That's an ornate one you've got there today.
You think so?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot your lawn. Okay, anyway. And $1 membership, but since the live stream is down, the only people watching this are probably members, so you already have membership. God bless your heart. Hey, look at that. You still get the show even if the live stream's down. Oh, the benefits of membership. Okay. Go ahead, Johnny Pie.
Okay, let's start off with something fun. As the U.S. and Cuba have moved slightly closer together over the past week, two of the likely 2016 GOP presidential contenders have become quite a bit more distant. Here at TYT, we like to call that a catfight. The cats in this case are Rand Paul and Marco Rubio, feuding over whether Obama and the State Department have done well in terms of the agreement that they reached with Cuba. So this started off with Senator Rand Paul expressing support for the deal, for the modification at least to the embargo. Here is a clip of that.
You know, the 50-year embargo with Cuba just hadn't worked. I mean, if the goal was regime change, it sure doesn't seem to be working. And probably it punishes the people more than the regime, because the regime can blame the embargo for hardship. And if there's open trade, I think the people will see what it's like to all the things that we produce under capitalism. So in the end, I think probably opening up Cuba is a good idea.
Yes, those things we produce, like iPods and M&Ms and inequality, they need access to those things as well. So he expressed support, as we showed you right there. Very quickly, Marco Rubio responded, and he was pretty rough with his criticism of the senator.
Senator, your thoughts on Senator Rand Paul's comments supporting the president?
Well, like many people that have been opining, he has no idea what he's talking about, and I'll tell you why. Number one, the embargo on Cuba is an embargo that, quite frankly, has a bunch of holes in it. To give you an example, Cuba, the United States, is still one of Cuba's largest trading partners, even now with the embargo. All sorts of commercial products and humanitarian products like foodstuffs and other things are available in Cuba. Americans travel there all the time on what they call cultural exchanges. A bunch of Americans travel there, by the way, in violation of the embargo through third countries. Cuban Americans can travel as many times as they want. They can send a lot of money back to Cuba to their relatives. What's hurting the Cuban people is not the embargo. What's hurting the Cuban people is the Cuban government.
A lot wrong with what he just said there. So his point was that the embargo isn't working, but it would be working if we did a tougher embargoes. That's actually what Marco Rubio would like. So I guess you don't want those people to get the money. You don't want people in his district, in fact, to go ahead and send money back to their families. But he can't quite say that. So he backed off of it at the last second, because it's an insane ththing to be saying.
Every time somebody makes an excuse for why their ideology didn't work, it's always, well, we didn't do it perfectly.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And like communism, that wasn't really communism. If we'd done communism right, then right now we'd all be living under the Soviet Union and be awesome. Okay, maybe yes, maybe no. Largely no. So if we'd done the embargo right, you know that this is the same thing they're going to say when the war on drugs is finally over. But we didn't do the war on drugs right. If we had just executed everybody who'd ever smoked pot, then we would have won the war on drugs.
Well, it's like abstinence-only education. If you just teach it right, then humans will no longer have the biological desire to have sex with people.
Right.
We haven't done it right.
Right. And, it's funny. We're joking about some of this stuff, but like there are people with the death penalty. We administer it far less frequently here in the United States, although we've still killed 35 people this year. But there are definitely those who think, and I take this because when Jank was in favor of the death penalty, you were in favor of this. Like, yeah, get it done quick and publicly, like then it would be working.
That's right.
like they do in Saudi Arabia and Iran. Right.
Yeah.
And
Make it stick.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if you've noticed, there are no more murders in Saudi Arabia or Iran.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no thievery either. They just had to take off one hand. So that was the first of Marco Rubio's little clips there, but there are more. He expands on why he thinks that growing closer to Cuba would not be a good thing for America.
Look, Venezuela's economy looks like Cuba's economy now. You can't even buy toilet paper in Caracas. And there's no embargo on Venezuela. What Venezuela has in common with Cuba is they both have adopted radical socialist governmental policies. And I would expect that people would understand that. If they just took a moment to analyze that, they would realize that the embargo is not what's hurting the Cuban people. It's the lack of freedom and the lack of competent leaders.
So should we have an embargo on Venezuela? Like, what's he?
Yeah,
what is his point?
Yeah, that's the thing I can't quite discern because, then if the government is what's hurting the Cuban people, which, by the way, we agree with, we think the Castro government is certainly hurting the Cuban people, right? Okay, but the question is, what do we do about it, Marco? That's
the same
what we're
thing
trying to
we've been
figure
doing
out.
for half a century, I
Right.
imagine.
So,
And obviously, Megyn Kelly thought that same thing and then asked this very tough follow-up.
I know you say you don't care what the polls show, but if it's so bad, why do so many people support it? Why did we see cheering in the streets in Cuba today?
Well, for a couple of points. On the Cuba front, I think the people of Cuba are so desperate, they're hoping anything is better news than what they have today. They want this to work. So do I. I wish I was wrong, Megyn. I wish that, in fact, this economic opening would lead to democracy. But here's my second and final point. We have a poll every 2 years in Florida. It's called elections. Every member of Congress in South Florida is for the embargo. They have elected. We had a governor's race where Rick Scott, who was for the embargo, defeated Charlie Crist, who was against it. I was elected to the U.S. Senate on this platform. My predecessor was elected on this platform. That's a poll that takes place every 2 years at the ballot box.
Yeah, and so a couple of congressmen down in Florida should determine our foreign policy towards one of our closest neighbors.
Yeah, I think
doesn't make any sense.
Let's let Congress, the delegation from Florida, decide why stop at Cuba.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we handle North Korea? Let's get Ileana Ross-Leighton in on that. Find out. Bob Martinez should take chair. I mean, it's nuts. By the way, I was kidding. I thought, because of course she didn't ask a tough follow-up, because that question is just sitting there for a guy who says, look, the embargo doesn't work, so let's double down on the embargo. But of course she didn't ask that question, but then it turns out we did have another clip, so we aired that. But that was an interesting thing. She did at least ask. They seem pretty pleased in Cuba. You keep talking about how terrible it is for the Cuban people. And
also among Cuban Americans, what he's defensive about is that polling now indicates that even Cuban Americans say lift the embargo.
Well, why don't we actually jump to those? Graphic 5, we can show you some of the results. Sorry, Jesus. So some of the results that have come back, 68% of respondents favor restoring diplomatic relations with Cuba. And these are, by the way, all Cuban Americans being polled here. Among specifically younger respondents, 90% of respondents favor restoring diplomatic ties. And a large majority, over 70%, responded that the U.S. embargo of Cuba has not worked at all or has not worked very well.
remember,
those are just Cubans, the people that he says are totally in favor of what he's. We don't even exactly know what he's saying.
I'm just guessing, but if George W. Bush had done this, a few years ago, he would have been completely in favor for it. Like 100%.
No.
Why? Because the embargo hasn't worked for years. Everyone knows it hasn't worked for years. What you have in Miami is you have a certain group of the original Cubans that came over, who were mainly, in a lot of cases, the wealthy.
Who lost their stuff.
Who lost their stuff, and they're pissed off and
Yeah.
want to be vindictive about it, versus other people who came later and they want to maybe
Or
save
even their
families
children and
travel.
grandchildren who, growing up under their direct control, them telling the younger generations exactly what they should think about Cuba, they can't even get those people to support the same policy.
Yeah. No, those guys, the Cuban Americans, honestly, that you're alluding to, the old school guys, the ones who had their pocket picked by Castro, they're never going to let it go.
And even Bush did.
And by
even
the way,
under
their
Bush,
pockets weren't completely picked. I mean, I went to college with some people from, the regime there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure
And
they
they're
took out
still
some.
doing well.
Yes,
They
of
live
course.
in
I mean,
nice
they
houses.
came.
They've
Of course. But nonetheless, I mean, they were in charge of Cuba and they lost that power, right? And so, no, under Bush, under anyone, there's no way. Those guys are so deeply entrenched that they would never back away from this position. We could have the embargo for 154 years and have it not work, and they still would. It could be Castro's great-granddaughter running Cuba, and they'd still be like, give us just one more year.
And Jank's talking about really the power that they wield through the Cuban American National Foundation, the awkwardly named CAMP. And they're intractable, and what Marco Rubio is talking about, and they wield tremendous political clout still in South Florida, though as we're seeing from these polls, obviously it's going to be less and less, and that he can say these people were all elected on this platform, but even in South Florida, from the time that we were there in 1998, they don't talk about it nearly as much. It is not the pressing issue it was. It got revitalized by Elian, but they, and the younger Cubans, they really are baffled by it, and they just think it's their old.
Not to mention non-Cubans,
which is what those polls show,
who overwhelmingly don't even understand why this is an issue that's being debated for the most part.
So two last things there. One is some of the old guard is literally dying off, right? And so, I mean, look at how old Fidel Castro is, let alone Raul. And the guys who used to fight with them are about their age, and a lot of them are dying off. So some of that opposition is wearing down because of that. But here's something you really have to understand why we've had the embargo for 54 years and why almost all the Cuban American politicians are both in office and still supportive of the embargo, even though almost no one else is. It's the money, Lebowski.
Yeah, right.
So the old school guys who we've been talking about here, Cuban Americans, Wes is right, they still had a lot of money, not all the money that they had, but a lot of money, and they spend that on politics.
Yeah, the Cuban American National Foundation is as powerful a lobby as there is in South Florida by far, and the AARP is in South Florida.
Yeah. And so if you even if the 70% of Cuban Americans roughly are against the embargo at this point, you know how politics works. Who cares? 70%, it could be 90%, it could be 95%, it doesn't matter. Yeah. The guys giving the money are the ones that control the policy, and the ones giving the money are almost all exclusively in favor of the embargo. That's why their guys win, and that's why their guys will never change their position, because it isn't about ideas or things that work, it's about paychecks.
But as you've said, they are dying off, and eventually that money will be bequeathed to people who don't agree politically with that stance.
I just want to point out, I think I'm the only member of the panel who may or may not have broken that embargo and visited Cuba. I'm not saying I did, I'm just saying I might have. I might have taken a flight to Mexico and flown to Mexico from Cuba. And it's amazing when you get there because you realize this is all...
If you'd been there.
If I'd been there, what I would have thought is... This is nuts. Like, because you know who's there? Tons of them? Canadians. They're everywhere because they can go. You can fly from Toronto to Havana and they want to go. And you're like, that person's speaking English. It's amazing, right? It's not some crazy forbidden. And to say nothing of tons of Europeans. Like, people go there. It's just us. It's not like there is an international effort to isolate this country because nobody thinks that's a wise thing to do. Yeah. Nobody really cares. They're not a state sponsor of terrorism. They're not particularly oppressive if you're going to list. I'm sure the dissidents who are locked up feel they're pretty oppressive. But in the grand scheme of your listing oppressive countries, they don't rank that high. You can do a lot worse. And so there are Americans there. I mean, there are Americans there who sail in all the time. There are people who did what I might have done and gone through another country. And then it's like silly. You can't walk down the streets of Havana without tripping over a Canadian family.
Yeah. And not to mention the fact that, of course, the changes that have been described so far don't fundamentally change the relationship all that significantly. You still will not be able to openly conduct tourism from America and things like that. But really fast, so you pointed out that Megyn Kelly did not have harsh follow-up questions for Marco Rubio. Rand Paul did. As we said, this is a cat fight. It has to go back and forth. They batted around with their paws. Rand Paul says, hey, Marco Rubio, if the embargo doesn't hurt Cuba, why do you want to keep it? Many retweets there. Senator Marco Rubio is acting like an isolationist who wants to retreat to our borders and perhaps build a moat. I reject this isolationism.
Let's pause on that just for 1 sec, because that's a seriously aggressive tweet at another senator. Like, I mean, to say nothing, another senator in your own party. Yeah, like you want to build a moat. That's like, I mean,
yeah, and there's already water separating us.
You can read, seems to me, Senator Rubio is acting like an isolationist who wants to retreat to our borders and perhaps build a moat, Dick. Like that's inferred.
It's inferred. The dick is inferred. Yeah. So yes, it's super harsh. Everybody, welcome to the 2016 election. It has begun.
Yes.
And second of all, he is flipping this. Because for those of you that's not familiar, with Rand Paul's reputation, they charge him with being an isolationist because of his libertarian principles. So he gets to turn around now and go, I guess you're the isolationist. Ha ha, got you, dick.
Right. Can you read the last tweet, just because I think
yes. Rand Paul goes on to tweet, the United States trades and engages with other communist nations such as China and Vietnam. So Marco Rubio, why not Cuba? And then finally, what about the majority of Cuban Americans who now support normalizing relations between our countries?
Yeah.
And he linked to the results that we've already
and
showed you.
leave that shot up, because like that was in the whatever story we printed this from. Where did we print this from?
And that's from NPR, I believe.
From NPR.
Yeah.
But like all throughout my entire life, any picture of Cuba or any picture of Cuban Americans.
That's right.
But Cubans, it's always just two old guys sitting outside playing chess. That's how we represent Cuba.
That's true.
And nothing does a poorer job of thinking, why do we have an embargo against this country?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of
Those guys are in charge?
Right. There's a bunch of 65-year-old guys playing chess. I think you know what? Let's trade with them.
Yeah. I think they like the imagery because it's sort of two sides squaring off against each other. There's strategy and tactics going on. I think it fits metaphorically.
I think what's interesting watching it is watching the press in this country behave as if the embargo's lifted and we can all go to Cuba whenever we feel like it, the government's going to magically change.
Right.
Like all these Canadians have gone, all these Western Europeans have gone. But when the Americans get there, we're going to really decide we're really done with communism now.
The embargo didn't work, and so will not having an embargo.
That's right.
That will also not work. Yeah.
I think in the long run it will, but it won't take 54 years. It'll take 24 years. That's my prediction.
Yeah, and we're about to have, again, at some point we're going to have death of Castro and his brother, of both. And so how is Fidel alive?
Yeah.
Remarkable.
Actually, he's
cells.
been taking a lot of experimental Russian drugs for about 10 or 20 years.
And it's working, apparently.
Yeah, no, it's working big time.
And by the way, just worth mentioning that the story came out not long after my father died, that what he had told us, this sort of really great story of my father's back-channel negotiations to soften the relationship in Cuba during the Nixon administration. That Kissinger called my father and because my dad wrote a book with Kirby Jones about Castro, Con Fidel, and my dad would talk to the Cubans, and he'd go to LaGuardia Airport and secretly meet with Larry Eagleburger, who was Henry Kissinger's assistant, and then they'd talk, and then they'd relay it back to Nixon, and they'd try and soften. And that was tried in an attempt in the 1970s, which, coming off the efforts that Nixon had with China, that's what made sense to Nixon, and it did make sense. And my father was running that back channel there, and obviously it didn't work.
All right, one last thing. Anytime we talk about sanctions or embargo, you have to remember the Jank rule. You have to remember it, okay? I've never called it the Jank rule before, so this will be your first chance to remember it. Okay, sanctions and embargoes can work. They work in countries where there is more diffuse power, where there's a real upper class business interests. South Africa, Russia.
They might be working in Russia as we speak.
That's right.
Maybe not to accomplish what we initially intended, though.
Egypt, Iran, those are possibilities, right? In a country where you have basically a dictator, North Korea, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and Cuba, they have no chance of working, none, because they don't care about the people, and those people in power, the small number of people in power, are never going to run out of money. They're never going to run out of caviar, right? But if there is a ruling class with a lot of different business interests, sanctions and embargo can really hurt them. And if they do, then they put pressure on the leader to make a change.
Sanctions and embargoes, I believe the Jank rule says, if I remember reading it and studying it in college, is most effective in countries with some degree of capitalism.
That's right. That's why it's really important not to do an embargo, so that power can get more diffuse, and so they could have a ruling class like China, and so that we can begin to affect them and have a more reasonable relationship, which eventually brings democracy.
Again, another reason not to do this. You know how many people Cuba has?
No, I don't actually.
You want to take a shot?
72.
No, they have more than 100 people. That's silly. 11 million people. It's nothing. It's this tiny little. It's nothing. It's nothing. There's 4 million people in Havana. About.
Okay, you know what? Now that you told me that, here's another possibility. We just open up everything with Cuba and then stop paying attention to them for 20, 30 years and see what happens. Like, who cares? It's 11 million people. In the past, it mattered because they were going to put nukes there, and then we were threatened by that. Nobody's putting nukes in Cuba. Just fucking leave them alone, and you'll wake up 30 years from now and be like, oh, the other night, the granddaughter of Castro stepped aside, and
they're going to have elections in 6 months.
Yeah, they're having elections, and everything's fine. And the main complaint in Havana is too many McDonald's.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, it'll change when it changes, and until it changes, a tough break for some Cubans, I suppose. But it's not the worst thing in the world, and who cares? And they have health care, and they got a pretty good education system. Those things are true.
But they can't make more than $20 a month.
Yeah, and look, and when I was down there, when I might have been down there, they're guards, they're guys with guns standing on the corner. It's freaking intimidating. And the Cubans can't go into the hotels, and it's an oppressive regime. I wouldn't want to live there, but I also don't. But we don't need to worry about it. Yeah. It's not terribly our concern.
All right, sounds good. Ready for the next story? Yeah, let's do one more.
It's a fairly small one, but yeah, I think we can do this.
Okay, actually, before we go on, I should have noted John's T-shirt as well. I just realized in the middle of that story. No, not yet?
No. I think we have so much news to get to, and there's not a lot of time.
Okay, just show it to him. So just tease him a little bit. Okay, so that's something you're going to see in the next year. A little
soon,
teasy tease that none of you care about. Anyway,
a couple of weeks.
All right, we move forward.
They can look back on it with fond memories.
Right. They'll be like, "Oh, I remember when John had that T-shirt."
That. Yes.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
Is that the thing that you did to the thing that I liked?
I don't know what you mean there. You were very good with your
that sounds like that might be
there.
something dirty.
Yeah.
Is that the thing you did to the thing I like?
You hid your intent better than you hid your past trips to Cuba. I mean, you might have been trips to Cuba.
Possible.
Yeah. Okay, here's a little story for you. Let's see if you enjoy this. If the various budget cuts in the Cromnibus spending bill didn't interest you until now, consider this. According to the head of the IRS, cuts to that organization could cause you to have to wait significantly longer to receive your tax refund this year.
You're not getting a refund.
Okay, well, many of us might, okay? And so for me, at least, that is a concern. John Koskinen, the commissioner of the IRS, says everybody's return will get processed, but people have gotten very used to being able to file their return and quickly get a refund. This year, we may not have the resources. He goes on to say that taxpayers trying to reach the IRS will have only about a 50-50 shot at getting their call answered, and those that do can expect to be on hold for a while. I would have expected that was the case anyway.
It's actually shocking how easy it is to get somebody at the IRS.
Really? Yeah. But because of the massive cuts, and we're talking about like a cut of $346 million in the next year, and also having to pay an additional $250 million in salaries and expenses because of a government-wide pay raise that'll be coming into effect next year, they are suddenly having to come up with over $600 million, or short of $600 million. I'm not great at math, that's why I don't work at the IRS. But anyway, it is a big problem. They're not going to be able to hire as many people as they normally would to process tax refunds and things of that sort. And it could be that gets people to care about these sorts of spending cuts. Perhaps it's a pipe dream.
But the people who enacted the spending cuts are excited because it means less IRS agents able to audit
investigate. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
and that is the
tax
entire
cheat,
point.
this is the greatest news in the world.
Well, and he went on to say that.
He
said one group that will be helped by the budget cuts are taxpayers trying to evade their bill, labeling the funding reduction a tax cut for tax cheats. And yeah, we've talked about that before. It's a nice little two birds with one stone thing when people cut the IRS.
So let's just be really clear about this. You have to understand that this is not an accident. That the Republicans cut the IRS budget not because they're concerned about the deficit, but because they want people to evade their taxes. Those are their donors, and that's their donors tell them, by all means, we're the biggest tax cheats in the country. Help us by cutting the IRS. Now, it's not necessarily a memo that's written like that, but it is very well understood. Now, let me explain why. Okay, so if you were a rational person interested in raising revenue, like you were a businessman, you ran a company, right? People who run companies care a lot about their revenue centers, right? The profit centers, right? So they don't like spending money on lawyers because the lawyers won't necessarily bring in money, but they got to do that, right? Human resources, they got to do. But the sales guys, those guys bring in money, so you spend more money on sales because they're going to bring in money, right? So now, what's the one thing that brings in money to the federal budget so that we have smaller deficits? The IRS. That's our revenue center, right? And so if you wanted to do any cuts, you wouldn't do it at the IRS.
Yeah.
In order to bring in more revenue so that we can have smaller deficits, you would actually put money into the IRS and strengthen the IRS so you can collect more money. So when you cut the IRS to the bone as they have, what they're saying is, of course we don't care about deficits. We don't want revenue coming in, because the people who pay the most amount of taxes are the same exact people who are our donors. And they've either moved their money offshore, they've done all the tax loopholes in the world, but on top of that, some of them also evade taxes. Yeah. So the less audits, the better. And it's not even necessarily the evasion. I mean, do the Mitt Romneys of the world really want the IRS to get into the nitty-gritty of the Cayman Islands and their post office box there, and whether that was perfectly legal, or if they really skirted a couple of loopholes to kind of get that money? Because then we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, and in some cases even billions of dollars per person sometimes, right? So those guys are highly motivated. Cut the IRS to the bone. The IRS is their enemy. That's also the reason why you have fake IRS scandals. Oh my God, they investigated the Tea Party and conservatives, and you find out later, no, they actually investigated liberal groups more. But you do that whole hubbub, and then you use it as an excuse to cut the IRS even more.
So a couple things I would like to say to this. One, the Republicans are always talking about how they want to elect a candidate who will run the country like a business. But they don't, because somebody who ran the country like a business would see this, as you say, that's a revenue center, it's a revenue source. That's where a responsible leader would be like, we got to make sure we get all the revenue we're due. We're not going to go after people for money they don't owe, but I'd like to collect what we owe. There's no easier way to make money and balance the budget and keep the deficit low. Then there's the other thing, is what you just mentioned. This a piece in this article from The Hill, in one sentence says, Koskinen said he and senior IRS officials continue to lobby lawmakers of the dangers of underfunding the agency, but also pointed out Congress started to slash the IRS's budget well before former agency official Lois Lerner acknowledged the singling out of conservative organizations.
Yeah, I love that they throw that in there, by the way, that Lois Lerner acknowledged. No, it's a big scandal. Yeah. They also acknowledged that they looked into liberal groups even more. Well, so Ben's point is that before the BS scandal, they had already cut the budget because that was their entire intent.
Yeah, and all of what you
really clear about that intent for decades. They hate the government.
Right, that's right.
I mean, they hate paying taxes. They've always said that, and I think they do run it like a business. They're thinking of it like an investment bank looks at a business before it goes public, which is load it up with debt and get it out the door.
Yeah.
Right, that's a different kind of business, but that's not
what they want to load us up with debt. Right. They don't care about the deficit.
Yeah. And everything that you had said, Jank, about how this clearly isn't going to benefit the country in the long term and all of that could have been used by the Democrats in their messaging to attack the Republicans. You could have pointed out that every time in the next couple of years as we gear up for the presidential election that the Republicans say, well, look at the deficit, look at the debt. If you could have attacked them and said, well, it might be easier to tackle the deficit and the debt if you weren't making it so hard to collect tax revenue. You could do that theoretically if the Democrats, including Harry Reid and Barack Obama, had not so enthusiastically supported the Crownomnibus. And now you can't support that because they said it wasn't that it was passed over their objections. It was passed with their support. So now they are on record as being in support of this.
But you can't. No one has literally in the history of the country ever won an election by saying, I'm going to get vigorous about revenue collection. I mean, but
you could show that they're incredibly hypocritical about it at the very least.
You could try. It's a tough one. It's definitely a tough one. I mean, you're better off, I would think, in general, the way Democrats play politics is peculiar. But if you're working correctly at it, you just increase funding once you're in office, but you don't talk about it, and you don't make a big show to fund the IRS so that they can audit more people and go after more revenue.
Yeah.
Because even though we all know that if you're making $62,000 a year, it's a good chance the IRS is probably not going to come after you really.
No, actually, that's not true.
Well, that's
they're just as likely to come after you as anyone else. That's part of the reason it's set up that way. Otherwise, the wealthy would say, we're all subject to this and no one else is. Everybody is subject to an audit. That's what's scary about it.
So it's easy to demonize the IRS, so this makes the Republicans' plans easier, right?
That's right.
So Ben's right about the politics of it, but I would flip that around and say, look, when the tax cheats get away with their schemes, that shifts the burden onto you. Don't let them make you pay more taxes because they're cheating the system.
Yeah, you paid your taxes, but look, they evaded their taxes, and you can show corporations that paid not just zero taxes, but in fact got money from the government in place of taxes they should have paid, and then cut jobs or shift them overseas. It is difficult, I think, because people are so anti-tax, but I think that you can differentiate based on the rich or the businesses as opposed to regular people paying their taxes.
All right, one last point. Everybody drink. You could make examples out of people, okay? If this country was not run by the rich, what you could do is take 2 or 3 people, it doesn't even have to be corporations, who legitimately cheated on their taxes. Don't screw over anybody over. You don't have to. You've got a million targets to pick from, right? Pick 3 guys who are excellent examples of tax cheats, and then perp walk them. Put them in handcuffs, walk them out of their buildings, make a huge story out of it, and then explain to people how they cheated on their taxes, and embarrass them and humiliate them and talk about these guys cheat on their taxes, so you have to pay more in order to make up for it, right? And then people get mad and they go, well, I don't want those guys to cheat. Let's make sure the IRS is after those guys so they don't take it from me. Now, no way the Democrats are going to do that, because the rich are also their donors. They would never do that to the rich and powerful.
And many of them are probably also tax cheats, I would imagine. By the way, I would not suggest this, but do you know what they do in China to people who commit tax fraud? They execute them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's not do that. That's a bit
like incredibly high-profile, politically connected people have been executed for it.
But they're doing that
probably
less
for
the tax fraud.
No, I get that.
I need to get this guy out of the way.
Right,
Yeah. That was the excuse they gave, though.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Quick break. We'll be right back. All right. Back on the Young Turks. Jank, Ben, Wes, John. All right. So, hey, look, again, live stream knocked out for technical reasons today. If you remember, you're getting this anyway, because that's what you always get. And then on the upside, for the non-members, you've hit one of the 2 weeks in the year when we are putting up the full show on YouTube, just so you guys can see what it all looks like, including all the wonderful mistakes we do live. So you also get to see it as well, just not when we're taping it. Okay, let's keep going.
We're still trying, though, right?
Yeah, we're still trying.
We're trying, but we're going up against the North Koreans, so I don't know what our odds are.
Could you imagine if it was the North Koreans? Because, I was making fun of them yesterday. So,
How do you spell his second name? Jong, J-O-N?
Jong-U-N. Go.
Okay, this should be fun. Bill O'Reilly, one of the top generals defending innocent Christians in America against atheists launching their yearly war on Christmas, believes that he's actually won. He's declaring mission accomplished. Over the course of this week, he's talked about it twice. First, on his show, he said, I've been doing this for about 10 years, and this is the only year we have not had a store command its employees not to say Merry Christmas. Looks like we've got a duplicate there. It's over. We won. Anyone can say Merry Christmas if they want to. They don't have to. I'm not Stalin, but I'm very happy. I might have just fulfilled my last obligation on Earth. Oh, well, then he can move on then, I imagine. But he is declaring that he has, in fact, won. I don't think that will stop him from talking about it next year. And, in fact, it did not stop Fox from talking about it literally the next day on other shows. But he is saying, mission accomplished, no more war on Christmas, they've won.
It's really one of the great straw mans of all time.
Yeah, no, it's been a brilliant maneuver for over a decade. And so the reason it's brilliant is once you start defending Christmas, it by definition, in people's minds, subconsciously, makes people think, well, somebody must be attacking Christmas, right? And Christmas is the thing that conservatives care most about, right? So it's a cultural thing, it's an identity thing, it's not a political thing. I mean, Benghazi, blah, 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 maybe, whatever, but my Christmas. And Bill O'Reilly, I think, actually does believe it. I mean, it's a great maneuver, but in his mind, he lives in an alternate universe where he's like, member of the King's Guard and Frodo and Spider-Man all at the same time. Like, in his mind, he fought this war and he won. I mean, look, let's go to video 6. Let's go to video 6. You have to understand the delusional state of this guy, right? Remember when he said this?
I'll tell you what. I covered
Bill,
4
you're
wars with a pen.
And an arrogant idiot.
All right, cut him off. Cut him off. He's a jerk. I covered 4 wars with a pen. Okay? So don't impugn my courage ever again. You're a weasel.
See, how did that not hurt him more? There have been no consequences for saying any of that.
Of course not. There's never any
I don't think
consequences.
anybody covered it as much as we did.
Yeah. Oh no, nobody covered it. Almost nobody. So in his crazy world where he's the savior, he covered 4 wars with a pen. I don't know if the war on Christmas is one of the 4.
That's a good point.
Okay, but he saved Santa Claus. Like, this guy is crazy.
He's crazy.
Right?
He's so. Stephen Colbert signed off last night, right? Colbert show, and
it's too bad.
O'Reilly's 4 wars with a pen, because as soon as you read about how he won the war on Christmas, He makes up an enemy, makes up a war, and then declares victory over the war. It's fantastic. Yeah. But I instantly thought about I'm so glad we pulled that. I fought 4 wars with a pen. Guys risked their lives. Guys were killed in those wars. But he fought with a pen. He fought with a pen.
And he even said, don't question my courage.
Don't question my courage.
Courage for what? For what? Even if you fought it with a pen, which I don't know what that means. It doesn't take any courage to write down something with a pen.
It's not, and then, but like, so Colbert, like, it's like he's spoofing himself. I mean, these are so perfect. Like, I'm so great, I won the war on Christmas. Yeah. I mean, you can just see Colbert like, it's done. I won. I get it.
Yeah. In fact, he has probably declared war. He's probably declared victory in the war on Christmas, I'm sure. If you look back in past years, I bet Colbert's done that. Yeah, and the 4 wars with the pen, it would have been Colbert. Colbert would have smiled a little bit more. That would have been the only difference in how he delivered those. Yeah. You're a weasel. It's the same exact thing.
I think what always mattered in the wars and who the enemy was the ACLU. Because that was always kind of the right-wing enemy, for Reagan. It was like the evil ACLU growing up in the 80s. Right. It was all how bad the ACLU is. The Christmas thing it was an outgrowth of that. And from there, it was like,
that's right.
They just forgot the ACLU, and now they're like, it's all these leftists trying to take away our Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. And in his mind, he's always right about everything, right? So it's a combination of brilliant strategy and delusion at the same time. So, for example, when he was debating the atheists, there's the video 5 ace, the famous moment where he says this.
Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that. You can explain.
Oh, we got to have more of the reaction next time.
Yeah.
But he can explain it, right?
Of course! It's the moon, you idiot! You idiot! Anyway.
He covered 4 tides with a pen.
But in his mind, he won that debate.
Right.
He's like, showed that schmuck. Yeah. Obviously, God is saying, tide go in, tide go out, tide go in. Right? And of course, the atheist can't explain that because God commanded the tides, right?
Yeah.
And in his mind, he did win the war on Christmas. But can we all at least agree then, if you have won your mythical war, then please shut the fuck up about it, okay? We're done with it, right? You're never going to do another segment on it because you have won. It's over, right? I mean, according to you and your fantasy world, that's the reality. So shut up about it.
He's never had anybody in his life who's told him, hey, when you're talking to somebody, don't do this.
I guarantee. Okay, here's the thing. I guarantee he has.
Wes, let me tell you. Jesus, I want to put it myself.
I know
he's a jerk.
His co-host on A Current Affair wound up buying my ex-wife's apartment when we left New York in 2003. I guarantee she said something.
Oh, okay. Well, good.
She was not like, oh yeah, he's a great guy to work with. It was like, yeah. I know who he is.
What a difficult little prick.
So really fast, obviously it would be difficult to establish with data whether or not he had in fact won the war on Christmas, since it's fictional, since it exists mainly in his mind and the minds of other right-wingers. But we do have a little bit of polling data. Let's look at what Americans think about some of the combinations of government and Christmas. Here is some research by Pew. We're going to bring up this chart here. What you're seeing there, it's a little bit difficult, but understand that those top 2 boxes, those represent groups that believe that Christian symbols should be allowed on government property. The right one is whether or not they're accompanied by symbols from other faiths. So if you just had a cross or the 10 Commandments, 44% think that that's okay. 28% think that that's okay as long as you accompany it with the symbols of other faiths, perhaps the Torah or something that the Satanists would like. So that is 72% think it's okay to commingle those things. But you also have 28% saying either not at all or they don't know. And you can possibly combine that with 28% who say you can't just have Christian symbols. So it is really a mixed bag. I don't think he looked at much data before declaring mission accomplished.
Let me give you a couple other things from that Pew poll, because it's great. So in general, 40% of Americans say the Bible should not be taken literally, right? Mm-hmm. I can't believe
40%?
That's it.
60% say it should be taken literally.
40% say it should not be taken literally. I don't know if that means the other 60% say it should be taken literally.
Or don't know.
But it should be, of course, 90% say it should not be taken literally. Right. No. So that said, though 40% of people, though 2 out of every 5 Americans say it should not be taken literally, that said, they nevertheless believe in the virgin birth, because 81% say Jesus was laid in a manger. 75% say 3 wise men brought him gifts of frankincense, gold, and myrrh. 74% say his birth was announced by an angel to the shepherds.
Okay, wait, let me get. He was laid somewhere? I thought Jesus didn't get laid. Okay.
It's a baby.
I see.
It
Okay.
was laid, not got laid. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. And second of all, so why the discrepancies? There's someone who says, yeah, the virgin birth happened, and he was definitely, and the three kinks came. But the thing about the angels, well, that's
But
ridiculous.
also, right, so, and also, don't take the Bible literally, but that shit happened.
Yeah. There was no Jesus, but they did bring him gifts.
In all, 65% Americans believe all four key elements of the Christmas story are to be taken literally. 65% that it should be taken literally.
Yeah.
So you have to understand something. We all are in a frenzy of agreement, and we're amused by the nonsense of Bill O'Reilly, et cetera. To this day, we are a significant minority in America.
2/3, all four things happen.
Yeah. Wow. But, and of course, those people haven't read the books. You can't read the books
But
and think they're literal.
maybe there
but-
weren't any follow-up questions. Maybe if there had been a follow-up question like after they asked about the manger and they said, yeah, I believe
seriously?
it. Really?
The follow-up question
was,
really
in the
believe it?
poll is,
No,
really?
No, seriously. Yeah.
I love that because it's not an interview; it's a poll. Really? But look at what O'Reilly did. Now, his war on Christmas actually isn't about putting the Ten Commandments in the public square, et cetera, right? It's about whether people say Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas when you go into a store. But he's now got us talking about how ridiculous that is, and thereby pissing off Christians, and he's accomplished his mission, right? He's gotten us no good atheists to talk about Christians in a way where we're a little dismissive and we laugh about it, et cetera, and then he goes to see.
Right.
I told you, those guys are around, and I'm protecting the good folks at home, okay, who are a majority of the country. So it really is, again, a brilliant strategy. And then finally, he says it's over because there are no more stores doing it. How does he know that?
Yeah.
You didn't see any.
He's got a very large intelligence network spread out.
He's
throughout
working with the
country.
North Koreans.
Next year,
Might be.
unless he wants to continue touting, you know he's going to talk about it next year.
Of course.
So either he's going to continue to tout that he won the war, or he's going to say, you know, we won, we were ahead. And I gotta be honest, I let down my guard in 2014. And now they're back, but I'm back at them. I'm back in the battle. I've signed up for another tour, a fifth war, another tour in the war on Christmas.
We got to do likewise. We've let down the good folks at home, okay? We should do our own war. Let's create a war. Let's,
The war on.
there's
Do we have to come up with it right now? Can we think about it?
Okay,
Right
and
now.
we'll take suggestions through Twitter, email, to our website, TORTnetwork.com, etc. What mythical war should we create and then fight against and then later win? Okay, so think it through. We'll think it through here, and maybe we'll come up with something before the end of the year.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, good. It's a good plan.
Okay. All right.
We're carrying on. We're
Yeah,
over
of
time.
course. Yeah.
Okay.
Keep going, dude.
Okay.
Keep
Okay.
going.
Yeah, I guess Anna's not here to shank me anyway. Okay, let's talk about Obama. For those waiting for more than words out of the White House in response to the various abuses of power by police departments around the country in the entirety of that we've been in the United States, especially in regard to the African American community, you might be getting your wish. Very soon, President Obama will sign an executive order that will establish a task force to look into those abuses of power and to deliver to Obama by March 2nd a set of recommendations, concrete recommendations on what can be done to reform police departments and get them to, I guess, bridge the gap, I suppose, with the communities that they are intended to serve. The panel will be co-chaired by Philadelphia Police Chief Charles Ramsey and former Assistant Attorney General Lori Robinson. Ron Davis, Director of the Justice Department's Community-Oriented Policing Services Office, will serve as the group's executive director. And understand that this task force will be going on concurrently with an internal review by the White House of police department operations and training and things like that. Davis, who'd previously been referenced, Ron Davis, said that the review would likely encompass an examination of how police departments recruit officers, how they could diversify, their use of force procedures, and concerns about implicit bias in policing. The panel will also review best practices for the use of body cameras, a central component in the president's response to the policing controversies. So by March 2nd, we'll have a set of concrete recommendations, although bear in mind that we also had that in regard to abuses of power by the NSA, and we all know how that turned out.
Now, well, there's a big difference there. President Obama is perfectly fine with the so-called abuses at the NSA. He's the one who authorized it, along with President Bush. In this case, I think he actually does care that that the local cops clean it up. He didn't authorize them to do any of that. And I think I want to give him a little bit of credit here, because earlier we had said, hey, we wish he'd take more concrete action in addressing this issue. This is obviously still a systemic problem across the country. Now, as always, we would have done it differently here. I would have hoped that the president would be more aggressive and hold a press conference where he doesn't just, in an interview as he did, talk about, oh, somebody once confused me for a waiter, right? But have a real conversation about race and the huge racial issues that most African-American men and oftentimes women deal with in a press conference where he brings people from different backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, but who are African-American, and explain their experiences. Nonetheless, at least he's doing this, and it is a beginning, and it's certainly something you would not have gotten under a Republican president. So chalk one up for, well, elections do matter. It's not, we wish they mattered more. We wish that he was far more progressive, but it's a step in the right direction. I hope that it doesn't just peter out, that they actually have recommendations and we actually do something about it.
See, here's why I don't think you need to be worried about that. That is very often our fear, is that, you know, they say they're going to have a commission and then it's 6 months or a year after the incident. But I feel confident that in America there will be abuses of power, there will be beatings, and there will be killings by the police. There will be video camera footage, cell phone footage showing it around the time that they finally come out with their report. I feel pretty confident about that.
Of course, but because it doesn't take much for that to happen. But, you know, police are a lot better than they were 30 years ago. This is not going to be a big speech praising the police, but I mean, it was worse, and it has gotten better, and it can get better. But yeah, it'll take a long time. But I mean, this whole, it's a, you know, as we've talked about when Jimmy Dore's here often, you know, it requires an entire change in the manner of thinking, and that doesn't come from a panel's recommendation. That probably comes from an entirely new generation of police officers hired and trained.
Yeah, but
if the recommendations change how you train and hire those, then that could lead
that could make a difference. But you're not going to see dramatic changes for 10, 15 years.
Right. But this is a part of the process.
That's right. Yeah,
this is how we lead to change.
That's right.
So cops have gotten better in the last 30 years because we're seeing them more, and they're having to react to that. In the past, they'd kick the living crap out of people and shoot people, and there was no cameras, and nobody would find out. Nobody would be to the wiser, right? That being said, they're also worse in some regards, because in the past, they used to at least say freeze and things like that, and they would take a moment before they killed you.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's a cultural shift in the wrong direction, where a cop is never, ever, ever supposed to risk his life or his well-being under any circumstance, and he should shoot immediately before any risk happens. I mean, even in a story that we just skimmed, there was a shooting in Pennsylvania where 6 people were killed. Almost nobody talked about it because we're so used to mass shootings. It was some crazy guy.
Killed his family.
Yeah, killed his family. His wife's
family,
family, right?
yeah.
And he was hiding out in the woods and then eventually he had killed himself. But in that small part of that story that nobody covered was, except for the one place where I read it, to be fair, right, on Huffington Post, they said that one of the kids he was trying to kill was a 17-year-old, the nephew of his ex-wife, and the guy had hit him with some sort of hatchet and hurt his skull real bad, cut off his fingers.
The 17-year-old hit him with the hatchet?
No, the 17-year-old got hit. So he's lost his face, some of his fingers. His skull is bashed in. I mean, he's barely alive, but he barricaded himself in, right? And he survived. The cops get there, but the cops see that there are dead bodies on the ground, and they see there's somebody upstairs. They don't go in for 7 hours.
What?
You know why? Because they're never, ever going to take a risk to themselves.
Yeah.
You see, and it's interesting because the difference in mindset, even within the cops and the firefighters. If there's a burning building, the firefighters go in. They don't think, well, that's a danger to me.
Let it burn down?
Yeah, right? No, there might be people in the building, so they rush into the fire to get things out. I mean, they're careful, of course, right?
Yeah.
But cops go, it could be the shooter, it could be a victim. I don't give a shit. If he dies up there, I don't care, as long as I don't take 1% risk with me,
Do you remember what ended up happening to that person?
So finally, 7 hours later, they go in, and they got SWAT teams. You're a SWAT team. Go in there, and if the culprit is in there, well, you got a SWAT team. Go in either way, right? And so you don't know if he's got a hostage. Anyway, the kids survived. Thank God. And so we're all right. So I think the cops' culture, in some ways, has gotten worse in that regard.
That's some cops, though. That's not everybody. I was in a holdup in a bar in a restaurant a couple of years ago, and I called the police, and they couldn't see. There's no windows on it or anything, and I'm like, there's a guy with a shotgun in there and a guy with a pistol, and the police went right in. Like there was no pausing or anything. They just, boom, they went right in.
So what kind of life do you lead?
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing.
You've never been in a holdup?
Yeah.
No, I've never been in a holdup.
5 more minutes and he would have disarmed the guys.
No, not at all. If you've been in a holdup, you realize it doesn't matter what the carry laws are in the state. When you're in that position, someone already has a gun on you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
They were just robbing the place?
Well, I was sitting there with it was this little place on Sepulveda. It was like a lounge. It was like a couple old people.
That's your problem. You go to lounges on Sepulveda.
No. It was the Dear John. It's like down the street. It's like
I
a
know
couple
the place.
old people around the piano, and then me and another guy at the bar, and suddenly I hear, "Give me your fucking jewelry, bitch!" And I'm like, dude, I didn't see a black guy in here. And my head's, maybe he wants
out
the
he's
ring
Chinese.
back from his fiancée because she was cheating on him. And I turned, and dude, this guy with a fucking ski mask and a pistol, like distance from me to you, pointing at the bartender, and another dude with like a shotgun at the piano bar.
Were they?
And I just turned to the guy. I'm like, dude, I'm out of here.
That's the story where you got up and
I walked out the
right?
door. They're like, "Don't freeze, motherfucker! Just always get out."
Did you keep walking?
Fuck yeah, I kept walking. You kidding me, dude?
And they didn't. And then you called the police.
At the second I was out the door, I called the police.
No, Wes is an
and then
amazing
And then
dude.
you hung around like across the street to see how it was
Yeah.
going to turn out.
Absolutely.
No, what I love about this story is, like, what would you do? You'd panic.
get out.
No, 9 out of
Urinate.
10 people, like, you just sit there like, oh shit, right? Wes just calmly gets up,
finish
doesn't
his
run
drink.
out, doesn't
No,
run
I
out.
didn't finish my drink.
Right.
Right.
I got a free one when we went back in because he called the cops.
You pay
I got
for
a
a
free
drink.
drink.
Calmly he gets up, doesn't run
Calculated
out,
a tip.
walks out, and where are you going? Just keep on walking.
Keep walking. You don't hear them. They're talking to the other guy going out the other door. They're
Did they
not
yell
talking to
something
me.
at you as you were leaving?
Yeah, they said, "Stop, motherfucker." And so
And
I
did you
was like,
respond, or did you?
I'm not the motherfucker they're talking about.
They must be talking about a different motherfucker.
Like, oh, you've seen Pulp Fiction, the scene when they're robbing the diner,
Yeah.
and that couple leave, they go, and they kind of freeze and they sit down. I'm like, I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going out the door, man.
And it was resolved without bloodshed.
Nobody got those. As soon as I walked out the door, they took off because, like, the cops will be here in 5 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Oh wow, that's interesting. So back to this is one other thing that should be noted here. They just did a Gallup poll, and it turns out now 13% of Americans believe that racial issues are the #1 issue in the country. That's
pretty high.
the largest number since the '91 riots with the whole Rodney King and the LA riots, etc. So my point in bringing that out is that sometimes you need to shine a light on these things to grab people's attention and for them to go, oh yeah, there is something wrong here, right? Now it's more non-whites than whites. Non-whites say, 22% of non-whites say it's the most important issue. 9% of whites say, but still, that's a big number. It seems like a small number, but it's a big number because that's the number of people saying it's the #1 issue in the country, right?
Yeah.
And it has gone up dramatically in the last couple of months. So when you have the country paying attention and saying this is important, and you have the president putting together a commission, well, that's how you begin to discuss if they have the right culture, the wrong culture, and how we can address it. So it's a step in the right direction.
And there's, this is going to get co-chaired by the police chief in Philadelphia, Charles Ramsey. There's another couple of cops on there, the Roberto Villaseñor, who's the Arizona police chief. There's a police labor leader on it also, in addition to some, civil rights. Constance Rice is on there. A Yale Law School professors on there and others. So, hopefully it's Assistant Attorney General, hopefully it's well-rounded and isn't going to, hopefully they're going to challenge the cops on there.
The final point that I want to make is I don't want to be a downer. I'm glad that they're actually doing something. When we found out that there wasn't going to be a Darren Wilson indictment, I was just waiting. What is actually going to happen? And this is something, I suppose. But as big of a proponent of the cameras as I was in the past couple of months have led me to change my opinion. Not that they shouldn't have them, but that having them won't necessarily change much, because we've seen just in the past 6 weeks that those cameras don't necessarily change behavior that much, and they certainly don't change the outcome when cops kill people that much. Because we saw in New York, we had the footage of them choking him to death. In the Ohio Walmart, we had the footage of them shooting that guy to death almost instantly. With Tamir, we had footage of them shooting him almost instantly. And that one is still pending, But at the same time, it's not an open and shut case when we see them
just indicted. They hopefully will get fired in Cleveland, but they're not going to get indicted. They thought it was a gun. That's like the easiest out in the history of the world.
But in 2 seconds, they got out and shot a kid.
But that's like to fire. That's not going to get him indicted. Again, the fact that he's a kid isn't going to matter. None of that's not
I'm just saying that having the footage doesn't necessarily change all that much.
But don't remember sample sizes. Like we're looking at incredibly small sample sizes. And it really only takes 1 or 2. It takes one DA to do it that gives the second DA, even if the first one's in Kansas and the other one's in Oregon, it gives them like, oh, look, you can indict the cop. And so my hunch is, again, 5-6 years with cameras, we keep seeing it.
Maybe.
I don't know, but there's the possibility of making
Don't hold your breath for a Kansas DA to invite him.
That was a bad state chosen at random.
God, I'm so fat. Because when you said Kansas, Oregon, I thought, Portland. Good food. All right. We'll take a break here. We'll come back in the second hour. Cara Santa Maria will be joining us. West Point Clark, thank you.
What do you think the odds are that Cara Santa Maria has ever been a holdup?
Not very high.
You never been mugged either?
No, never.
No.
You guys just sit home all
I was
the time?
like stopped,
Not a
and it
deal.
could have turned into something, but it diffused when I was young.
You've been mugged and been in a holdup?
Well, I've had a couple things. I was a white guy in the wrong neighborhood once. And I'm trying to think of any other reason, because I am an asshole. So they want to do stuff. But I was a white guy in the wrong place. And like, I'm sure you've seen videos on YouTube of the lone white guy on the ground with dozens of people kicking them in the head, screaming, "Get that white boy." I was that white boy.
How old were you then?
25.
Well, all right. So,
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Hey, Joe, how come they never make those points on the Young Turks?
And I'll tell you, it definitely changed some of my racial perspectives for a couple years, just from anger and everything like that. But then you move on past that shit.
Right, and then you're a rational human being and you adjust it. That's right. Okay. All right, God bless. We'll be right back. All right, back on the Young Turks. You got it? You got it, Jesus? Because we got a new power panel here. Drop it. Cara Santa Maria joins us. Woohoo!
We've got the blazer. Oh, is that my music?
Sure, why not?
We've got the blazer club going on.
I know, right?
Very professional.
I'm waiting for Jesus to do.
I thought he was going to do it too. I thought he was going to do it. Oh
What's
well.
going on?
There's an animation.
There's an animation that goes with it, but
Well, I didn't post, I guess.
Whatever.
okay. I feel like I haven't done the show with you in forever.
You haven't done the show with me for. I've been like totally MIA from TYT, and it's funny because people even ask me like on the street. People will. When are you going back on TYT? Like just random people I run into it.
To be fair, we've spread rumors.
Yeah, it's weird. So I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, no, I'm glad the North Koreans returned you.
Yeah, exactly.
I just had a nice TYT reference where somebody, I was buying food and the guy there was like, "Hey, Mankiewicz," right? I think that's you. I knew that was you. It's exciting. And I go, "Oh, you like old movies?" And he goes, "What?" I go, "Oh, I thought," and he goes, "No, TYT."
I'll give you one quick one. I had a nice one the other day. So first of all, now people are starting to double up. I had a TSA agent who said, "Hey, Jank, good to see you again." I was like, "Oh, okay." But the one that happened that was really nice the other night is I go to one of these cocktail parties in LA for the business crowd, yada yada. And it's a mess when we arrive late, and they go, "Oh man, sorry, the lot is full. We're not taking cars anymore." And he goes, "Oh, you're the guy from the Young Turks." He's like, "Fuck it, I'll take your car."
Turks. That's awesome.
Never
I was
brought
like,
it back.
"Hey, that was actually something useful. That was awesome." So thank you, Eric. I appreciate
So
it.
privileged, such privilege.
I know, right? I know, totally.
Almost worth the death threats, right?
Almost.
Almost.
All right, let's do it. What do you got for us, Cara?
So I think the big story is the story of the hour for everyone, actually the story of the month, which is the Sony cyber attacks, hacks, whatever you want to call them, terrorist threats. And as you likely remember, I've got a timeline here of the Sony hacks. Monday, November 24th was the very first sign of these Sony hacks taking place, when kind of these little evil messages were showing up on Sony computers, and as a precaution, they were all shut down. Throughout the week, Sony employees were working without access to email, were working without computers, and then we started to see the leaks. We started to see 100 terabytes of stolen data leaking out over the internet. Everything from streamed movies being leaked all the way down to, of course, a massive dump of individual emails, especially those of Sony chief Amy Pascal, which were pretty embarrassing for the company.
The 10 terabytes for those people who aren't dorks. Nothing
Sure.
personal, either of you. That's 10 libraries of Congress.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's amazing.
It's pretty amazing that there's just that much data.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
just in
amazing.
a
Like,
company
the one
running.
company, I get it, a big company, but that much
Still,
data?
absolutely amazing.
That's going to come into play as to who the culprit might be in a minute.
Yes.
But Kara's going to tell us who
to be
the
fair,
leading theory.
I'm sure the vast majority of that was not in document form. Like movies can consume data a lot quicker than
to
documents.
be fair,
So.
most of that was not in documents.
So when you were referencing the dorks,
I
you were
knew
not
I-
talking to John or
I knew
or
I'd get
Kara.
a good one.
And furthermore, I'd like to note
Yeah, most of that.
I thought it was worth noting they do make movies. It's possible some of it is movie footage.
Yeah, they make
maybe.
movies
Way to
that we
add-
don't get to see,
Yes.
which brings me to my anger with Sony. So there's a bunch of updates today over the course of kind of last night and bleeding into today. So the FBI has officially stated today that they think the North Korean government is responsible for this hack. The hackers also have new demands today, which are never really. They basically said, "Yay, Sony, we're very happy."
Right, they said thanks.
Yeah, they said thank you for agreeing to pull the interview and not show it on Christmas Day. But now they're saying we don't want it to ever be seen by any eyes. We're talking don't release it in video on demand. It better not get leaked. There better be no downloads because we still have all your personal information and we're willing
also
to use it.
erase any sign that had existed.
Yes.
Promotional materials, footage,
Which is
stuff
crazy
like that.
because it's true. I drive around Los Angeles and I still see all of these billboards and it puts a tear down my cheek.
Yeah,
That's
you're
a
like-
movie I'll never see.
You're like Iron Eyes Cody.
So, yeah,
Reference it all.
I got it.
Is it the babies on the pit? Why?
That was the Indian in the Don't Litter, where he would cry for not littering, and then it turned out
He's not Indian.
he's not an Indian.
It turns out he's Jewish.
Probably also wasn't really crying.
Yeah.
So I know there's another component to this story that you guys have been excited about, which is this George Clooney interview that he did with Deadline around basically starting a petition for all of the other big studio executives to not follow suit, to say, you know what, if this were to happen to me, I would still show my movies, and Sony, to put pressure on Sony to say, show the interview, don't give in to these terrorist
So let me ask you about
demands.
this, because I think I misread the Clooney story when I read it this morning. His petition was started after Sony's the decision by the theaters and Sony to
No.
not air the movie.
No.
No,
before.
it was when Sony was mulling over whether that decision should be made.
Okay, so even so, the more incentive for these people to sign
Yes.
what seemed to be a pretty innocuous petition.
And the truth is,
Yeah.
like, he couldn't get anybody on
It's
board.
amazing. And he's George Clooney.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like Johnny Pine decided to send out a petition.
Right.
And the MGM executive's like, thanks, John, we'll pass.
Thank you for choosing me.
I think it really just goes to show how much none of this has anything to do with integrity, and it has everything to do with money.
Of course, of course.
Everything, which is
There's
why
so much
every
more.
major studio exec was like, nah, we're not going to follow suit with that.
Well, so there's a number of factors there. So there's the lawyers who are going to come in and say, listen, if you do this, we're going to be on the hook for a lot of money, and so you really got to be careful because it could really do significant damage to us, and they're going to talk your ear off about your liabilities, right? Then there's going to be the insurance guys, and they're going to come in and say, look, you're insured, but now these are active decisions you're making, and then so we're not going to pay the insurance if you go forward from this moment. I'm guessing,
And
right?
there's all of the theaters who are basically saying, we're going to pull even though you have the movie available, we're not going to show it because we don't want to get bombed.
Although notably, George R. R. Martin, the writer behind Game of Thrones, said that he would show it at his private cinema that he owns in Santa Fe. And he called them cowards. He said that they were going to soil their small clothes over terrorist threats,
which
I like.
Oh, I love that.
Old-timey underwear. But he says here's the thing, though. They're going to fail. If the hackers have laid out the new demand that it can never be released in any form, eventually it will be released. Modern movies, it's not just a reel of film. That exists on editors' computers in multiple locations, special effects computers in multiple locations.
This is James Franco and Joe Rogan. They have a copy.
Of course.
They are always high.
And also, by the way, you don't think...
It's going to get out there somehow.
You don't think that every hacker collective is desperately trying to get this so they can be the one to leak it? And we already know Sony cybersecurity blows. It's going to be hacked and it's going to be leaked, and I can't wait. I didn't really care about watching it, but now I feel obligated to see it.
Yeah, me too. So, but this goes to show why you should never give in to hostage demands, no matter how much your lawyer and insurance dudes talk your ear off, because now there's more demands, and it's never-ending demands.
It's extortion. It's absolute extortion.
Right.
Bring back Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man.
You've even got the president saying openly, during a press release, that Sony made a huge mistake and that he doesn't back this decision.
He says but now Sony has fought back with that, which I think is interesting because it rings untrue. Michael Linton, the CEO of Sony Entertainment, says, I think actually the unfortunate part in this instance is the president, the press, and the public are mistaken as to what actually happened. We do not own movie theaters. We cannot determine whether or not a movie will be played in movie theaters. So to sort of rehearse for a moment the sequence of events, we experienced the worst cyber attack in American history and persevered. This is where
they were almost
persevered for 3.5 weeks under enormous stress and enormous difficulty, all with the effort of trying to keep our business up and running to get the movie out to the public. So they didn't make the decision to pull the movie? Right. So then he says, he's blaming it all on the theaters, and that's totally legitimate. The theaters put Sony in a bind. There's we don't pretend. And the theaters don't have Sony's money. The theaters don't have Sony's lawyers. So that if there were an attack and they were sued, or anything where they were sued, the theaters are at greater risk than Sony. Then he goes on to say, the movie theaters came to us one by one over the course of a very short period of time, and we were very surprised by it, and announced they would not carry the movie. At that point, this is an interview he did that you can see tonight, I believe, on CNN, on Anderson Cooper. He did it with Fareed Zakaria. At that point in time, we had no alternative to not proceed with a theatrical release on the 25th of December because we didn't have any theaters. And then he goes, we have not caved. We have not given in. We have persevered, and we have not backed down.
But they haven't closed down the studio?
But they
closed all of Sony down.
Exactly.
But
the doors aren't boarded up.
They have caved, they have given in, they have not persevered, and they have backed down.
And by the way, there was some chain somewhere that said that they would play the movie. It's not true that every chain said they wouldn't play it. So if they wanted to play it, they could have played it at those chains.
Also,
I know, but that's not the real issue.
I gotta say, my favorite tweet. I want to give it credit, but I don't know who did it because it was retweeted all over Twitter.
Probably Steve-O.
Was, if only Sony had some sort of home system in millions of homes where they could stream a film to anybody who wants to download it.
That's exactly it. So it's not like they had to go to a podunk, theater chain in the middle of Indiana. No, they could have just released it on the internet.
On Xbox.
On Xbox.
Listen,
right?
So technically the PlayStation.
PlayStation. Shit, sorry.
Linton noted, and then so you and I, we read those quotes. All of us hear that from Michael Linton today in response to the president saying Sony shouldn't have done what they did. So he says, no, we had no choice. It was the theaters. We didn't back down. We were strong against terrorists, right? And then all of us thought in our head, well, why didn't you then release it, get around the theaters? And he says, the request for video on demand of the interview, says no major VOD distributors have stepped forward. He's already blaming it on them for not taking action.
Because the best way to be a salesman is to just sit back and wait for people to come to you.
We don't have that direct
interface. That's what I do at bars.
We don't have that direct interface with the American public. So we need to go through an intermediary to do that. But you're saying
they have that direct access. The PlayStation Network. They can release it free. They can release a copy to BitTorrent. It can be everywhere in the world in an hour.
Nobody thinks that Sony, if they had intent to get it out, it's Sony. It's not us.
And remember, the other aspect of this is not just the money. They have more embarrassing emails those executives.
Exactly.
Right? And so those executives don't want those emails out. But they're gonna come out, man. They're toying with you. They're playing with you, right?
I'm slightly. I think I'm mistaken, and I don't want to overstate it. A random conversation I happen to have with someone who has read emails that have not yet been released. So I can't even tell you the executive, but I can tell you that he said he's read emails of an incredibly powerful executive, right, who everybody knows, and he said, and those are horrible.
Yeah.
So
no, they're not going to release it.
No.
On that alone, because you have to understand something. If you're an executive making this decision, what do you care about Sony or this or that or the international implications? Well, the thing that you care 99% about is your career.
Yeah.
And if you've written the damaging emails that would look horrible in public, it's going to destroy your career. So this is a binary issue. It's a 0 or 1. Your career is either going to exist or not exist. So he's going to view it as, I don't have a choice. I'm going to do whatever they tell me to do.
They think it's a binary issue because two things. One, you may not have the end of your career if the things are released. And two, you may have the end of career even if it's not released because all this stuff may come out anyway.
Exactly.
Or
they
beyond
have
your
it in their hands.
Beyond your career, if they actually believe that North Korean infiltrators could blow up a theater, is it impossible to believe that they could blow up the home of a Sony executive? It's a lot easier to target specific executives than theaters all over.
I don't think they
you don't think that they worry about the threat of violence against them personally?
I think the lawyers worried about it to the theaters. I think Sony is only worried about their embarrassment.
I don't think anybody is actually that worried about an individual theater getting targeted.
I don't think so either. It just seems, but I think they're scared about that. And then they also, it would appear, since yesterday, I've trotted out a number of incredibly dumb theories. One, Jank and I were, and Jank will get to it in a minute, how we've been from the start thought, fuck, it's not North Korea. They can't feed people who live 2 miles outside of town. They outside of the capital. There's no way they did this. But
they don't want to feed those people.
Yeah, I would argue it's not one
exactly.
or. Yeah.
But then and I also just thought there was something puzzling. Jank didn't buy this, and I didn't really buy it either. But just that Sony's decision was so puzzling, right? That I thought there's something happening here. They're working with the government. This is part of the effort to flush because it was like if it was a movie, that's what it would be. But the president's response today. Anyway, that theory's wrong.
I was hoping.
That theory is totally wrong. But now it seems that Sony may have just been this dumb, in addition to this scared. But what I don't think it appears they have significantly miscalculated is the fact that, holy shit, Mitt Romney and Michael Moore are on the same page. We have made such a gargantuan mistake that we have brought the entire world has united against us.
I was so holding out hope that this was a huge publicity stunt. That this was going to sell seats to this movie because the North Korean government was so mad that they were going to, leak all of these emails.
So on December 24th, they go, supplies, it's in the theaters!
And then every person in America goes to see this movie.
Okay, now I introduce Exhibit A. Okay.
All right, let's
so
hear
the
it.
government says, we know it's North Korea. They're using the same, I don't know, John can tell you the real words, portals, ISPs, etc. that previous attacks that came from North Korea also used.
When they attacked
IP
the South
addresses.
Korean banks.
Yes.
Right. And so, and they lay out a couple of other circumstantial pieces of evidence that if you're just reading, you go, that's pretty persuasive, right? And so, and again, I'm probably wrong. I mean, it is the entire FBI saying it's definitely the North Koreans, right? On the other hand, probably the best known hacker in America is a guy named Sabu, okay? And he did some of the top hacks in the history of the country and then flipped and now works for the government, okay? Because he got caught and he's like, okay, what do you guys
take the
need?
deal.
I'll take the deal, right? I can't pronounce his last name. Hector Monsegur? Okay.
Monsegur, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so Sabu came out and said, it ain't the North Koreans, okay? He said, look, in order to do this kind of attack, because among the reasons is there's so much data. First of all, it's a couple of different reasons why. He says, the North Koreans, if this much data went through the one pipe they have basically for the internet, right, is a way of referring to it. He's like, it would take down the entire North Korean internet. They don't have that capability, right? So that's point number one. Point number two, much more importantly, is this kind of hack takes a long time. So it might take up to a year. It would certainly take months.
But how does
so
he
they would have
know?
had to plan this hack so far in advance. And he's like, there's just so many parts of the story that don't add up. I don't know the details of that because I'm not a dork like John.
How could he possibly know? How could anybody really know the capabilities of the North Korean government? They're like so shrouded more than any other government across the world. Just because we know that their citizens don't have access to a huge internet infrastructure, we don't know what their government
or
is.
It could have been conducted in a different country by North Korean operatives.
So that's right, of course. And he's saying that if they did it, they certainly did it in China. They did not do it in North Korea. So which then implicates might implicate the Chinese government.
We already implicate the Chinese when anything comes to North Korea.
But don't misunderstand. I get it. They don't want to feed their people, but they're inept. That's partly what this is.
You have to be really skilled to keep that many people impoverished. And in the dark.
It's also comparatively.
They've managed this cult of personality for 3 generations.
Yeah, that's not ineptitude.
But then that's the only thing they're good at. They can't even. Their missiles launch and land in North Korea. Like they don't. This is not a land of.
It's a different way to focus your assets. If you're not good at doing large military industrial things, maybe a better way to do it is to do cybersecurity.
That's right. And so let's be fair and present the other side. As Cara's pointing out, I've read now a number of articles, including a really good one on Vox, about how they have this Bureau 121 and they train the guys in Russia and China and other places and they deploy them in other countries. And it's actually the most prestigious thing in North Korea. And they had a group of 500. It's now 3,000. And they get these special houses. And the whole thing sounds like the Hunger Games, by the way. They're in the capital and then et cetera. But having said all that, I'm still not buying it. Okay, I will stick with this to the end. The North Koreans could not possibly be this capable. They're not.
I just think if it was another terrorist group, they would have already stepped up and said we were responsible for this.
And so as I was reading Sabu's explanation, which I'm not sure I've done justice to, I thought there's someone. This took a lot of time and effort, a ton of time and effort, because we can't even figure out who did it, right? They're really sophisticated. This is as sophisticated as it gets. Someone who had a huge financial interest in this.
False
flag. Right there, it had to be somebody who was going to somehow make a ton of money in order to invest all this time and effort into.
What other movies are coming out that day?
Unbroken, goddamn Angelina Jolie.
But Angelina Jolie's visa did get leaked, and her passport. So
just
probably wasn't
collateral damage.
Exactly.
Just bear in mind that the government, and I assume that we haven't heard any secret FBI agent leak that no, this is bullshit. It's there's nobody saying it's a false flag. It isn't, right? Except they still don't know who did it. All they've got is what you said, this compelling circumstantial case, which is this has all the earmarks, all the markings of a North Korean attack. But they don't know what people, they don't know how. There's a whole, except they now think that they literally stole somebody's password. They stole the head. They stole the head of internet security at Sony's password, which made it a lot easier.
Well, that's really embarrassing.
That's
really
especially when you find out the password was password.
Which is also why
with an ampersand instead of an A.
That'll fool them every time.
Exactly.
Which is why some people thought it must be an inside job. Because and it was in the sense that except that the guy didn't.
It's not an inside job though if there's a mole. It's not an inside job if somebody infiltrates another company. And
no. I'm saying that it seems like an inside job because how else could they have gotten it? But they got it by stealing.
But it's not Sony doing it.
It's not Sony doing it itself.
I just think people like conspiracy theories. I don't generally. I'm an Occam's razor kind of person, and until I see evidence, a preponderance of evidence that says that North Korea couldn't have done this and that some other group is more likely, I don't.
I'm 100% with you. It's fun to speculate. North Korea is incompetent, and it should not be forgotten. But but also just bear in mind that the evidence presented that they have done it is also it's not outstanding at this point.
No, but it's the best they have.
It's also initial, and it might be that they don't want to reveal how it is that they track down hacking organizations.
Yeah, and they literally just released that today. There have been speculations for weeks, and just today they said we have enough evidence now to say publicly as the FBI that this was the North Korean government that was responsible, but we're not going to tell you much more than these 3 bullet points as to why.
And my final points are, look, it's not a false flag operation. The FBI didn't do it, right? But at the same time, it does help everybody. This narrative helps everybody. So the North Koreans get to say yeah, of course. Oh, you better watch it. And by the way, they haven't even taken responsibility. But
they've praised it though.
But they've praised it, and they're like, yes, you should be wary of us. Watch out what we can do, right?
Be like, yes, wary of us you should be. Watch us, we can do damage. You too.
North Korea's now Yoda.
The North Korean Yoda, right? And then you turn on TV and everybody's screaming, cybersecurity, cybersecurity. Dianne Feinstein was on CNN this morning saying we have to watch out for the North Koreans, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, and also the people inside the country, inside this country. So that also helps their narrative. So there's a lot of winners here.
Honestly, it helps the American people because I think it really. Do you guys remember that article that came out maybe a year ago about how the Supreme Court justices aren't on email? And they get like memos from their pages that bring them down the hall to them, and that's how they communicate, all on handwritten paper.
Yeah.
I think that this helps us because it brings this issue to the forefront of our governmental leaders and shows them like we cannot keep living in last century. These are real issues and these are national security threats, and we should be talking about them.
I know, but they never actually get the job done in things like this when we need them, but they do use it as an excuse to spy in on all of our computers.
That is true.
Right?
That's
And
true.
I also, I mean, like I was watching some guy on CNN who's on 10 boards now, and they introduced him still with the Department of Homeland Security. He was super irritated. He was like, I'm not with the Department of Homeland Security, Cyber Protection Division. If I were, I wouldn't be here talking. I wouldn't be on 10 boards. He's like, I'm a former member. I left 3 years ago. But he's like, look, this is what always happens. We have no internal memory. The Chinese, we didn't need a wake-up call. The Chinese hacked the military for crying out loud. Like, how many wake-up calls? How many wake-up calls do you need? So and companies don't want to pay it usually because it's super expensive. And companies make the decision of, we'll just deal with it afterwards. Sony, now there's no number you could give Sony where they wouldn't go back and pay for the extra security to protect themselves.
Now we're talking about motive.
Right. Well, so that's as always, as Dianne Feinstein said, like we'll have this giant panic about it, but it costs a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
And then next week, we'll have to take our shoes off at the airport.
And cut the IRS.
By the way, again, I should point out, I've seen the movie.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm so jealous. Do you have a
Was
copy
it the
that I can
greatest
come
movie
see?
ever?
Please tell me it just like wasn't that good.
It was pretty funny
Damn it.
until they wronged Kim Jong-un. They disrespected a really great man. No, it's pretty funny.
Now we're all safe here in the TYT studio.
It's pretty funny. It's ridiculous that it would actually offend anyone.
Yeah.
You know, and in fact, the parts that about killing him at the end are kind of immaterial. The cool thing was that as part of the plot is that they realize they don't have to assassinate him; they'll just humiliate him, and that will show the Korean people that. You know, these things were the truth. Like he's not a god.
Hey, spoiler alert. I was going to watch it. Oh, wait.
I'm going to watch it.
He doesn't bowl a 300 game every time.
He does poop.
Yeah, he does poop. He does in fact have an ass.
So are you
Quite an ass.
afraid right now because you're among like the 50 people in the world who have seen it?
Yeah.
So like that the North Koreans might say,
You now have state secrets.
yeah, we must now deal with Mankiewicz.
I don't have a copy of it, but I could describe it.
Yeah. No, Sony has agreed to eliminate all evidence that ever existed. Your evidence.
Sony's around the corner.
That's true.
All right, so and we might never know. And final caveat is, I'm not saying the Rothschilds did it. Okay? I'm saying I don't know. I'm just skeptical, and my speculation is that it's not the North Koreans. And if everyone, even if I'm right, and everyone has agreed to this fiction, that means we might never know.
We were so confident. I mean, I was so confident last Wednesday that it wasn't North Korea. I mean,
You were mocking me because I believed that it probably was.
Yeah, that's right. I may have mocked you.
Yeah,
That's possible.
Yeah.
And it was just appear that I'll hang with Jank here just because there's no reason not to.
This is where you're supposed to admit that you were wrong.
No, we're getting there. That's what I'm saying. We're losing. Right now we're losing.
Yeah.
No,
well, especially when you guys casually dropped that you understand that North Korean hackers have been trained in China. You believe that Chinese hackers could hack into our military, and for some reason North Koreans trained by the same hackers that could hack into our military couldn't hack into Sony. There's a few gaps there, I think.
Look, in North Korea, they don't know algebra. Okay,
No,
even if
I know,
they
but they're not
They-
in North
if they-
Korea. They're in
But
Russia
also,
and
wait,
China.
They is abroad. Yes, the
Yeah.
people who live in prison camps don't know algebra. The people
Nobody does.
who live in
Who's
palaces.
Who's teaching them?
The Chinese
Chinese!
hackers who know how to do it.
No, but
Demonstrate
like
they
you
can do it.
can't. It's not like a 28-year-old who doesn't like. There's no infrastructure. A 28-year-old goes to China. They're like, okay, dude,
There
this is
is
going to
an
take a while.
airport, though.
All right, listen.
There is an airport. They can go to other
I know
countries.
they're going to go to China and they're going to be like, all right, look.
And Russia
okay,
and
if you have
Iran and all the places where they're allowed to go.
2x plus 4
Yes.
equals 8. What does x equal? You're going to have to start there with the 20-year-old from coming as a
many
spy
Americans
from
can
North
answer
Korea.
that?
And if that's true, then the degree of help that the people who train them would have to do is significant, and that.
But you do understand that the North Korean governmental structure and social structure is such that there is a puppet master, and there are people with a shitload of money and people
I
with a shitload
understand
of
all
power
that.
pulling the strings of
Yeah.
everybody else. And so those people have access.
You were
Those
considering-
people know
Why would
algebra.
And can send people abroad to be educated
Why would,
and-
okay, last thing. We really got to wrap it up. But why would the Russians give the North Koreans the keys to the kingdom? The
Yeah.
North Koreans could turn around and use it against the Russians.
It's not.
There's no
Same
way.
reason we
There's
trained
no
the
way.
Taliban. Like,
No
it's-
way.
Yes,
We
we
had a
have-
Why would we
definite
give them
interest at the
Stinger
time of
missiles?
We
training
have
the Taliban.
no idea what North Korea's short-term interests are right now, and if they feel like their backs are against the wall, or if
No
Russia
way.
feels like their back. And plus, we're a common enemy. Enemy.
Yeah,
It's
both,
the
both.
same kind of common enemy, and North Korea always feels like their back is against the wall.
Yes.
They live with their
Which
backs
means
against
that
the
they
wall.
will make deals that don't seem rational, the same way
No.
that our government has
You
made
know-
deal
I get
why
after
we
deal
get
that
why
doesn't
North
seem
Korea
Okay,
would
rational.
make
wait,
the deal.
Cara, let's go over there and find out. Come on.
All right. No muss.
You want
no
me to
muss.
take him out?
It's gonna be
I'll
so-
humiliate him, you kill him.
All right,
Okay. All right. Let's take a quick break. Come back and do maybe other stories.
maybe.
All right, welcome back to the Young Turks. All right, now the live stream's back, and we're back to our usual Friday panel antics as we all talk into the show. I would have your tweets now, but I think even the person doing the tweets went home, suspecting that the live stream would not be back. But in fact, it is.
Woo, it worked.
All right, so there we are.
Kind of looks like our heads are exploding. A little bit.
Yeah, well, that's also kind of fun in a graphic kind of way. Okay, Adam Wisniewski is member number 1271, and Nancy Vancher is member number 2480. And Friday's post games are done by Dave the Curmudgeon Kohler, Malcolm Fleshner oftentimes, and Steve O. And sometimes Malcolm will sit in the center, yet they don't call it Malcolm in the middle, which is a bit egregious.
Yeah, that's you can't. That's disrespectful.
But they do have a fun game show that they do for the members. Totally true or totally false, or totally untrue, or something along those lines. And then you get to play along, and yeah, they're thinking of selling it to nowhere. But it is fun. It is a lot of fun. I think the
They should
members
play
enjoy it.
Dave Kohler's America.
They should. There's a lot of things that we should do we don't do. Okay. All right. What's next, Kara?
Astute. Okay, so next is a fun story about a theme park that's about to open up in Kissimmee, Florida, which is, of course, the center of family fun for America.
It's near Orlando.
Yeah, it's right next to Orlando. And technically Disney World, I think, is in Kissimmee, or it's right outside of Kissimmee. I don't think it's actually in the city of Orlando. That's besides the point. This theme park is very different than Disney, because instead of Mickey Mouse, you get to play with machine guns. It's a 13,000 square foot theme park called Machine Gun America. And children as young as 13 can be accompanied by a parent. And both the parent and the child will be accompanied by a trained range safety officer, and they will get to imagine themselves as crime fighters, international spies, and special ops troops in the theme park's shooter simulations. Although they're not really simulations because they're shooting live ammunition.
Okay, so kids as young as 13 are allowed to shoot the machine guns with real ammo.
Yep.
Now, we just had somebody die because a 9-year-old was shooting a machine gun. And what happens when a 9-year-old shoots a machine gun? Well, it has recoil, and it goes like this, and it went like that, and it hit the the trainer right next to
And that was
her
a
and killed
similar
him.
situation. It was a roadside kind of traveling theme parky scenario.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
where this idea of shoot a gun for fun. Don't worry, it's completely safe so long as there's an older person standing next to you.
And so in this case, they say that thing literally. They say, no, it's okay, especially with the kids. We're right there and we're holding it with them. And you saw some of the pictures there. No, but that actually doesn't necessarily make it safer. It might actually make it less safe, because if you're right there and it goes, you have recoil and it goes to the right, you're more likely to die.
Yeah, the 9-year-old killed the safety officer standing next to her.
Yeah.
It was the actual person who was supposed to be keeping the 9-year-old safe. Now, there is a quote here from, who is this person? Nierenberg. General Manager Bruce Nierenberg. So this is the guy who's managing Machine Gun America, that says, quote, "It's romanticizing our freedom and our history. I mean, it's part of American life. That's how we gained our freedom."
With a machine gun?
I'm pretty sure that's not how it went down.
True. It's like we were firing muskets, then we'd walk 25 yards more and kneel down, shoot some more muskets.
2 minutes later.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's right. Yeah.
No, actually, we have.
I'm gonna get you.
Ben,
I can do it faster.
Ben, you're wrong, actually. I have audio back from
Oh, you do?
1775, actually.
This is Concord, or is this Lexington?
Concord and Jefferson and Adams in the trenches, and here it is.
Well, there you
Yeah,
go.
They
the
were very
rapid fire
skilled.
shots heard
I'm
around
wrong
the
about
world.
North Korea and
Very
apparently wrong
skilled.
about this.
So guys, I gotta ask you, good idea, bad idea?
Okay. Look, here's the thing. So I fired a machine gun at a range. So I too have done your drug, and I had fun.
You do love freedom.
I love, yes. And I was like, this is for Madison. Okay. Anyway, and I've told this story before, and I didn't understand why it was snowing inside after I shot the machine gun. It turns out it's because I was going, and I was shooting the ceiling, and the cement was falling down. Okay, it was like.
And you're a grown man.
And I'm a grown man,
And there was
I'm
a
a fairly
library on
large.
the second floor.
Yeah, full of babies.
Yeah.
It's a baby library upstairs.
And I'm
smart.
a fairly large grown man, and it's and so if you're a rookie at it, which almost everybody is, because which 13-year-old has fired machine guns before?
The patriotic ones.
Or in the
Exactly.
Sudan. Sudan.
You know, the American Revolution reenactor.
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't know what you're doing, and it doesn't matter how much training you have or the guy next to you, and of course they told me how to fire it, and but still it went like this, right? Because I don't know what I'm doing. And if you're putting your 13-year-old, your 15-year-old, your 17, you're nuts. You're nuts.
Yes.
I love you, but you're nuts.
And that was
agree.
at a gun range. I mean, we're talking about a theme park. I think there are greater kind of philosophical implications here beyond, yes, I understand if you have a gun in the home and you have a teenager in the home that you want them to be trained on gun safety in case if they have to use the gun, they need to know how to use the gun, they need to know how to load it, how to take the safety off, put the safety back on. I totally understand when parents have that mentality of if we're going to have guns, we should all at least be competent when we have these guns, but not let's go pretend like we're vigilantes and have some fun. I think all that does is it minimizes how responsible you actually have to be around guns. It makes it so that it's one step closer to actually putting yourself in that first-person shooter video game, which is dangerous.
Yeah, if you're taking bites out of your like cotton candy between shots, you might not be absorbing how serious it is. I think overall this is a good idea from a business sense. I think that there are enough Americans who want to go to this sort of thing that setting it up, you're probably going to make a lot of money. I don't like the kids section. Devil's advocate in terms of like the people who die at gun ranges. People do die at gun ranges. Statistically, I think it's more likely that people go there to commit suicide because they don't have access to guns in their personal life. Overall, millions of people use gun ranges every single year, and you don't see thousands of people dying. So overall, it is safe, but I don't think it's a good idea to have kids there,
Yeah, I don't
especially
think
with machine guns.
I also don't think it's fair to equate the two because we don't have enough evidence here. We don't have enough evidence to see
With
whether or
children.
not this is going to be safe.
We couldn't have a gun range where you shot a bazooka. I would outlaw it. I would outlaw machine guns. You couldn't have any in the country. The military can have them. I know that's dangerous because the military might use them against us. There's the problem.
People would be really pissed that we just laughed at that joke.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
You're about to get some hate. Yeah. On the YouTube comment.
Bring it on, because I'm not going to read it. So, I mean, it's crazy. There shouldn't be a machine gun range. This is crazy. This is the United States of America.
And again, it's not a machine gun range. It's a machine gun theme park.
It's a theme park,
See,
right.
I think Cara's making the best point here because what we've done is we've made it an entertainment
That's right.
complex.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is so much fun. We fire machine guns and stuff. But machine guns are in a best case scenario for what? Protection of your family? Even though
guns
that
are
I
for
don't
mass
quite
murder.
understand.
Like,
Machine guns
really-
are for mass murder.
Machine guns
killing
are for
lots of
military
deer.
action.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, there is no such thing as a RPG action adventure park, right? Like, or there shouldn't be. Well, wait, there might be one day.
I mean,
so,
this would be fun if it was like a laser tag park. If it was like, you know, if there weren't real implications, because like you said, John, yeah, they're going to make a lot of money because a lot of people are going to want to do this until their liability insurance goes through the roof when the first child there dies. And I mean, I hate to say that and to sound glib, but I think it's only a matter of time before something like that happens. It's an expected eventuality, which is a really rough thing to say. I'm surprised that anybody allowed this to be built in the first place, and I'm surprised that they could get insurance on this.
no, but that's
theme
the
park.
madness of current day America, where we find this to be perfectly normal. So even the insurance companies that might be like, whoa, what are we doing, right? Like the insurance companies that are like at a water slide might be like, hey, that water slide's angle is too deep.
Yeah.
We'll be like, oh, machine guns? Well, of course, have at it, Hoss. Let the 13-year-olds handle it. Now then you'll get the guys who say, did you know that Alexander the Great was 16 when he conquered Macedonia? Oh, well, he didn't have to conquer Macedonia. But anyway, yes, I do know that. And I do
good
know
measure.
that 16 and 17-year-olds in dire circumstances could handle weaponry. I know that, right? But we're not in dire circumstances. We're in a theme park.
Yeah, now they handle iPhones.
But you know,
that's
it's also
pretty much
it's
it.
not just military action. Of course, you know, I mean, you know, I don't know how many Hutus and Tutsis were killed with machine guns. I don't know how many Jews were rounded out by the Einsatzgruppen in Germany, and they didn't use handguns. They gunned everybody down. It's for
That's what they're there for.
It's for
They're there-
mass murder and
yes.
defenseless people.
It's there
That's-
to kill way more people than a
quickly and efficiently.
non-automatic weapon would kill. Yeah.
And if you think about all the different arguments that people use, oh, I had to defend my home, I had to shoot a deer. You don't need a machine gun for a deer, and for protecting your home, shotguns, handguns, etc. That'll do it. In fact, if you have a machine gun, you might accidentally spray your family.
Yeah.
Right. You want a weapon that's more directed and more controlled.
Yep.
I think. What do I know about guns?
So, speaking of accidentally killing your family,
Right.
good segue. In Sheridan, Wyoming, we're continuing on. There still is actually, a man named Richard Phipps, luckily still with us, and he was driving his pick-em-up truck and threw his dog into the back seat. And what happened to be in the back seat? A gun, and that gun happened to shoot Richard in the arm. So I think this is a good lesson in gun safety here, that maybe pets and guns with the safety off don't mix.
Was it a canine military? No, fuck it. God damn it.
You almost had it.
Almost had it.
Okay.
I think that the real tragedy here is that they hadn't properly trained the dog to operate guns
He should have gone
first.
to Machine Gun World.
Exactly. You need the proper training.
My dog's a
Gun
German Shepherd or a
America.
Belgian Shepherd, and she would know how to handle the gun. It's a smart dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust my cat with a gun. Cats are dangerous.
Really have a cat. Jack was thinking of ways to get weirder. He was like, I don't know, I'll get a cat.
By the way, this is not the first time that a dog, especially during like hunting trips or something, I've seen people have like tried to pose a gun with their dog, and then it slips and shoots someone. Animals and guns don't mix, except when animals are being targeted by guns, and then you get something delicious out of it. I'm joking.
Those kinds of animals.
Yes, exactly.
That's true.
Yeah, not dogs.
But it is kind of sad because, you know, we hear the story. It always makes the news when, yes, a guy has his dog posed with a shotgun and then the dog shoots the owner, and then we all,
Yeah.
irony at its best. But we probably don't hear the stories about when the guy has the dog posed with a shotgun and the dog shoots itself. Like, we don't hear those stories. They don't make it into the news, and I wouldn't be surprised if that didn't happen a lot. That's
Yeah.
really sad.
Well, not a lot. It's still a dog. It's still got to be a peculiar set of circumstances. It's going to get the dog to actually pull the trigger.
Okay.
A lot.
I'll give
yeah.
you that.
So the real point.
That is awful.
Poor puppy.
Oh, Fluffy, what have you done?
And I mean, I think we can be a little bit lighthearted about this because dude's okay. Like, he got shot in the arm. He went to the hospital. He's going to make a full recovery.
And for the rest of his life, he's got the story about how his dog shot him. Right.
Exactly.
Now, but of course, if you're going to have a real point here, it is that guns are dangerous. I know everybody. I've never talked to a gun owner or to anyone online, etc., who didn't claim they were the most responsible of all gun owners, and they're all super careful. Except that we do a story every week, and if we want to do, we can do 3 a day, right? Of people who had their kids shoot them, or the dog shoot them, or they shot themselves.
They left it in the toilet.
The safety trainer who was doing a safety experiment
falls out.
It shot himself in the balls. Yada yada yada. Because it turns out guns shoot people, and you could and anybody who knows that in real life people are careless, right? Even about things that matter. Even when you're driving a car, oftentimes people are careless. That could hurt people, etc. And then at some point, if a dude loses his key 7 times, he might forget to put the safety lock on, and then he might have Fluffy shoot him, right? Yeah. So be careful with guns. But everybody now, since it's so ubiquitous, they're like, oh, guns for everybody, throw them around. Here you go, Fluffy.
We haven't reviewed this movie yet on What the Flick, but there's a movie coming out sometime at the end, I think December 31st, called A Most Violent Year, J.C. Chandor's new movie with Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain. And it's set in like 1981 in New York. It's of sort of mobbed up New York heating oil industry. Obviously, a great source for a movie. I mean, you just think, but
they took my idea.
They took my idea, fuckers. But they treat guns. The idea is this guy's trucks keep getting robbed, right? Because the people are stealing his trucks and his heating oil. He's trying to figure out who did it, and the Teamsters want to arm the drivers because the Teamsters are like, I'm not going to let these drivers go out unless they're ready to protect themselves. And most of the movie is about this fight between the guy who doesn't want to arm the drivers and the guys who want to arm the drivers. And this guy saying how dangerous it is to arm the drivers. From somebody will get hurt, and then his liability, he's going to lose the whole business, everything he's worked his whole life for. It was just incredibly refreshing to see an argument, like a sane people arguing about guns, and one gun, a handgun, to protect people who are legitimately getting robbed, by the way. But nobody's getting killed, they get punched, they drive off with the truck, nobody shoots anybody. And then there's a scene where one of his daughters finds a gun, left by, maybe on purpose, by people trying to deliver a message. And his daughter picks up the gun, Jessica Chastain's the mom, and she's playing with it, and Jessica Chastain doesn't even compute that, like, she finds a gun in the bushes. Like, why would there be a gun in our bushes? And the kid's playing with it, and she runs to get, she's like, Janie, put it down. And Janie doesn't put it down right away. And it's that moment of, you don't want your kid to panic, right?
Yeah.
But you got to get the gun away from him. And then that moment when she's like, okay, now I'm going to panic now. Like, this has gone on long enough, I'm going to panic.
And how do you have that kind of a stand down with your dog?
Right. But anyway, it's just, it's a sensational movie. See it when it comes out. But so nice to see, like, the gun debate being had by completely rational people.
Exactly.
This is nobody's suggesting a machine gun, but they're still reacting.
And that's the thing. Hollywood. When we talk about gun control and gun safety, we're not coming to take your guns. We're talking about protections. We're talking about having limits. We're talking about having rational conversations that are based on evidence.
Guns, by the way.
Watch out for Mank.
I'm coming.
He's coming for your guns.
Okay,
by the way,
watch out, they have machine guns.
Dogs would shoot you like this. Cats would shoot you like this. Okay, by the way, live stream's back. So is the hashtag TYT Live. Atomic Elbow says, we're here, Jank. I hear you, Atomic Elbow. Eric Johnson says, Machine Gun America is exactly what's wrong with America. We need to quit romanticizing tools of death. Okay, very good point. Titty Riot then turns around and says, well, first of all, says Titty Riot, and then says, does TYT just have a rack full of blazers that personalities throw on the way in? No.
Are you saying mine doesn't fit well?
Could we do that?
Yeah,
that would help.
Maybe we're actually working on that. Rudy Bouquet says, who's got the best fucking audience out there? We fucking do. TYT Army for the win. Because they stuck around for like an hour and 45 minutes while we fixed the stream. Mike Discount says way too much foreplay today. We're like, come on, give me the stream.
All right.
And
real quick, Jeffrey Hammer, America has to up the dog ate my homework excuse. Sorry, my dog shot me.
All right, so let's give you the last couple of stories here.
All righty, so we're going to move on to a story about Dr. Oz. Now, we've known that recently Dr. Oz has had Senate hearings, and a lot of people have become concerned over the last probably few months with whether or not Dr. Oz is actually full of shit. And now we know, based on scientific evidence, that he in fact is. There was a study published in the British Medical Journal that examined the healthcare advice given both by the Dr. Oz show and the popular daytime show, The Doctors. And here are the findings of that study. They randomly selected 40 episodes from each show, and they looked at 479 different recommendations that were made both by Dr. Oz and by the doctors. 479 by Dr. Oz, 445 by the doctors. Wow. In the Dr. Oz show, evidence supported only 46% of the claims that he made, so less than half. Evidence directly contradicted 15% of the claims that he made.
That's the biggest problem.
Yeah, and there was absolutely no clinical evidence about 39% of the claims. He just made them up. Also, on the doctors, evidence supported 63% of the claims. It contradicted 14%, and there was no evidence found in 24%. So not as bad of a track record, but still pretty embarrassing.
But the 14%, 15%, that's basically the same and better than 1 in 8 times that he says to do something. It's not just that we don't know. But I'll give him a pass on most of the we don't knows. But the 1 in 8s is, a less of a pass because he might be right or some, or they might be completely innocuous. The doctors frequently tell you to go to a doctor. Right.
Yeah.
The doctors do. Dr. Oz does not.
Dr.
Not
Oz doesn't.
much evidence that will help.
1 in 8, wrong. I mean, wrong. Like how many?
The opposite.
The opposite. Like literally, no, don't do that. No, don't drink milk. When you have that, you'll die. You know?
So not a lot of people might know this, but Dr. Oz is actually Turkish. He's there's like 7 Turkish Americans in the country, and 4 of us are talk show hosts. Okay, and so Jesus cut all their mics. Okay, we're done with this. What's all this anti-Turkish talk on the show, okay? No, Dr. Oz is one of the most respected doctors in the country. You should trust everything he says, word for word.
And
by the way, also the 63%, or whatever it was, 46% for Dr. Oz.
46% for Dr. Oz.
Well, yeah, exactly. That could mean a lot of different things. It could mean that there's been 20 different meta-analyses of studies that have been done all over the world of huge sample sizes that support it. Or it means that there was one test of 12 people in Austria back in 1973, and that supports it.
Or some of it is so vague that,
exactly.
Supports
is incredibly
he might say something
vague.
like, and don't make sure that you eat well and exercise. And right there, of course, that has to go into that's supported by evidence pile.
Yeah, I need more evidence before I start doing that.
Yeah, so you guys remember when John Oliver, his amazing talk show, he actually changed the name of the Dr. Oz show to check this shit out with this guy named Mehmet. Because that's really a more accurate title of the show.
That's racist.
I mean,
I almost named my cat Mehmet.
Is that right?
oh wow, how funny! But this is something that's important to remember. It's easy for us to sit here and roll our eyes and go, yeah, nobody buys into what Dr. Oz says. Nobody buys into what the doctors say. But 2.9 million daily viewers of Dr. Oz. Think about how many people that is. And a lot of these people, they may be able to pay their cable bill, but they might not be able to pay for medical advice with every little thing. They're probably not going to the doctor all the time. And they go, oh, Dr. Oz told me to do it. He is a board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon. Maybe I should trust him. Don't trust him.
Okay, so I think a lot of people do trust him. I don't think that's even close. I think a lot of people watch the show and and he's a very pleasant guy.
Totally.
And what people might not know is how good a surgeon Dr. Oz was and is actually, right? He's an excellent heart surgeon, one of the best in the country, okay? Now, that's why it's profoundly disappointing, the direction that he has gone. Look, if you're going to do a show about medical advice, I'll give you 1% as a margin of error, but you should be right 99% of the time. It's not something you play around with. Oh, you got cancer. I was right 46% of the time on how to treat you.
It's not that hard to do.
Right.
I mean, these shows have writers, they have researchers, they have people that get paid every
Play in
day
advance,
to
yeah.
fact check.
Yeah, but I think it is probably really hard to do and I think it's unrewarding from a television point of view if you do it well.
It is unrewarding.
Because
yeah.
most of it is going to be, that sounds incredibly complicated, we need to do more tests.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
you know,
and by the way,
that's how you're going to go on 97, because that's what a responsible doctor would say.
If you were to just provide people with what we know actually helps you to be healthy in terms of diet and in terms of exercise, it would be a very short show and it would be the same show every day, but people don't want that. They want some new berry from the foothills of Andorra every week. They want something new, some different way to organize fats, carbohydrates, and proteins.
Oh, new berry.
New berry. Yes, they want some new
that's from
superfood.
Middle Earth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I
It's
thought-
lemon
I thought
bread.
there was like
they want something new every time, but unfortunately, it takes research to determine if it's actually helpful.
At a certain point, though, and this is the argument that I hear over and over again that I get really frustrated with, which is, well, that's what the people want to see, so we're just giving them what they want to see. At a
I'm not
certain
saying it
point-
justifies it,
no,
but I'm saying
I know.
that that's what it is.
And so, but where does the buck stop? Where does the responsibility lie? We are circle jerking ourselves if we're only being fed what we want to hear. At a certain point, if somebody has the expertise, they are responsible, which is why we saw him in Senate hearings. They are responsible for providing accurate evidence. And if that makes for a boring show, maybe there shouldn't be a Dr. Oz show.
That's exactly right. And in those hearings, it was honestly embarrassing because he said, well, in order to entertain people, you have to say things like, it's a miracle drug.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he said, it's TV, that's why we use these big flamboyant words to capture people's attention. And it's not necessarily intended to be truthful.
And it's like everybody in Hollywood is in on that conversation. Unfortunately, everybody in Middle America is not in on that conversation. And so they're looking at this as if it should be a gold standard because he is a well-respected cardiothoracic surgeon. One thing that the study in the BMJ pointed out that's important to note, too, is that there's no way to really go in and look, and they weren't able to report on this. How many of those claims that were stated by Dr. Oz or by the doctors were based on conflict of interest? How many of them were because some company gave him a huge amount of money to promote some sort of vitamin or nutraceutical or, bogus treatment? That's
So
another
Dr.
huge
Oz, in
problem.
his very weak defense on that count during the hearing, said, no, I don't profit directly from these things. And oftentimes when they say, as seen on the Dr. Oz show on the internet, I didn't sanction that, I'm not making any money off of that. His defense was, no, we just make money from the ratings.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I pump things up, we get, everybody excited, 2.9 million people watch it, we make a ton of money. And the money that those guys make from their fake miracle cures, that's their business, not my business. And is that true for every show? We don't know, right?
So irresponsible.
Right, but that's what Dr. Oz says. Now, I believe I've done a great job of showing our lack of bias here, because Dr. Oz actually performed heart surgery on my uncle.
Really?
And you could argue saved my uncle's life. Nonetheless, I just threw him under a bus.
Yeah.
Okay,
Good job.
so that's
He'll now
how
need
we
a good
roll
surgeon.
over here.
Is your uncle still alive?
Yep. Dr. Oz might have planted something in the heart. Like, oh, hold on one second.
Done.
Okay, sorry, Uncle Mukhtar.
Uncle Multa?
Mukhtar.
Mukhtar.
It's pretty good. Maybe to my ear.
Yeah. But
I
I
don't
was
wanna
totally
attempt it.
impressed with, you nail, what is Dr. Oz's real job?
Cardiothoracic surgeon.
Oh, cardiothoracic surgeon.
It's just there's an ease to it. Like,
that's right.
you got it, but she has an ease.
I wouldn't even attempt it. Heart surgery.
Yeah.
Heart
it's a
surgeon. There you go. Heart and
Okay, you want to hear the final irony?
Cardio guy.
So we
Call him my cardio man.
Yeah,
Look at my heart. My heart is, and it turns out, we found it turns out my heart's pure.
looked into my soul. Like
into my soul, like
Yeah.
I did with poop.
But after I talked to the heart man, I had to talk to the budget man.
Yeah.
Okay, the final irony is that Oz in Turkish, of course, is not Oz. It's pronounced Öz, and it
I love
means.
of course.
Of course,
Yeah.
obviously. It's with an umla. Everybody knows that.
It's pronounced Uz.
Öz. Okay. Öz. Which doesn't play as well in Middle America.
Oh, yeah.
The Mehmet Öz Show. Okay. But it.
And what's his
Öz,
real last name, too?
That's his real last name.
Oh,
And
Oz?
It is.
Oh,
Öz.
I thought it was like, Uzbekistan or something.
No. He got super lucky. That's his real name.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And Öz means true. Ooh.
a hush falls falls over the crowd. Wow.
All right.
Yeah, it's rough.
We're way over time, but I love the last story.
Okay,
Can
we'll
we
do
do
the
the
last
last story? Come on.
We can do the last story.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So an EU court has actually ruled that obesity can now be seen as a disability, which has a lot of implications.
For this talk show host.
Oh my God!
I'm not laughing. That's horrible. That's horrible.
I'll get to my morbid obesity. Okay.
So it has a lot of implications across the board. It's a little bit of a complicated story, and truth be told, I don't really understand
super poorly written story.
The justice system in England or across the United.
It's very complicated.
Yeah, the European Union. But I will make a couple of points here. The National Obesity Forum spoke. So the findings of this, it was basically a court case. And the findings of this court case have a lot of really complicated implications that lawyers and academics are trying to understand now because it's potentially going to set some precedents. So we've got one comment here from Tam Fry, who is the National Obesity Forum spokesperson. And Tam said, this has opened a can of worms for all employers in this country. They will be required to make adjustments to their furniture and doors and whatever is needed for very large people. I believe it will also cause friction in the workplace because obese people and other workers, between obese people and other workers, 1 in 4 adults in the UK is obese.
This is
friction.
This
How
guy
small
is
is
with
rooms?
the Tam Fry is with the National
Yeah.
Obesity Forum.
This is how measured they are in England compared to the US,
But
by
I
the
mean,
way.
I can't tell. I guess I guess that's to get people to stop being obese. He's not
That's
a
true. He's
spokesman
not
for.
like-
For obese people.
Right,
Oh,
exactly.
I see. I was
Then I'd
confused
be
by
like,
that as well.
Jesus, hire someone else.
And so,
You guys won.
Celebrate a little. Give me a little, give me a little.
right. Go get some bangers and mash, man. This is good news.
So there were a lot of important points that were made, and I think that Tam Fry's point is one that points to a lot of real potential implications down the line here, which is historically, in order for an individual with obesity to be found to have a disability and probably qualify for whatever the EU's version of what we have here is the Americans with Disabilities Act, protections under the law are, they had to have some underlying medical illness that contributed to the obesity. So this person has, severe diabetes, and we have to make protections for that, or they have some sort of glandular problem that causes them to be morbidly obese, and we have to make protections for that. Now, the person who went to court weighed 160 kilograms. That's 352 pounds. I mean, there are like linebackers who weigh more than that, right?
Not linebackers, but football.
Oh,
players.
sorry.
Yeah.
God,
Linemen.
all of the like manly things I had to say today, I misspoke with Xbox and PlayStation, misspoke with linebackers and linemen. So, 352 pounds, this is where things get complicated too, because what are we considering to be obese? What is their frame? How much muscle do they have on them? And why are they obese, I think, is an important issue.
Maybe the guy's just big bone.
Maybe it's just big bone.
So I'll clarify a little bit on the legal issues here. But before I do, I like Ben's idea of go grab some bangers and mash. I like the idea of the obesity spokesperson be like, we really like what they said here in the car. Great job, man. Great job. Hold on, I gotta get some more pie.
This is the sort of discrimination they're fighting against.
Right,
like what you're
exactly, Ben. That's the kind of animal you are. Okay, so. It's the European Court of Justice. The reason why there is lack of clarity on this is because the decision is by definition not clear. So here's what they're saying. First of all, this case is not concluded because now that they have set the rule, it goes back to the local jurisdiction to determine if this guy qualifies under the new standards.
Yeah, there's no outcome yet in this guy's particular case.
That's right. So now the thing is, and why this is such a difficult question is, what is the level at which point you say he is obese enough to be disabled, especially because there doesn't have to be an underlying sickness in this case, in Europe now, right? And then point number 2 is, have you, is it a level of personal responsibility? Did he contribute to it, or is there nothing he can do about it? Yeah. And hence it's a disability, right? And that is incredibly hard to determine.
And that's not covered in this ruling at all.
And I think the main thing is then does it really keep him from doing his job?
Yeah, or does it make it so that there need to be accommodations in the workplace to help him do his job? And so there's another quote here from Omer Simji, and this is an employment partner at Irwin Mitchell, which is a law firm. So this, of course, like I said, there are all these legal officials that are trying to make sense of this ruling. And his quote is, This is a significant ruling, and although being fat is not enough in itself to be considered disabled, it could if it restricts an individual's ability to actively and fully engage in their work. That said, it would appear as though there does not need to be an underlying medical condition. This is new and will, in appropriate cases, mean that obesity in its own right can be deemed to be a disability. With 1 in 4 adults in the UK being classed as obese, this represents a major headache for UK businesses. So think about what these business people are going to have to do to accommodate now for basically, potentially 1 in 4 of their employees. What are the kinds of accommodations that they're going to have to start making?
So I think this is a really difficult issue, and I'm willing to be swayed on it. I'm close to 50-50, but I think that I agree with the decision of the European Court of Justice because, look, and I'm on whatever perspective I have, I'm on both sides of this, okay? Because I'm an employer, so I don't like pain in the ass rules that don't make sense, right? I don't want that, right? On the other hand, my doctors have adjudicated me to be morbidly obese. Okay, so I feel your pain, brothers. So, and by the way, too many people are classified as obese. I mean, come on, right?
As much as I'd like to make fun of you, you're not morbidly obese.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm overweight. There's no question about that, right? But
you're not
morbidly
like the subject
obese.
of a Discovery Channel
Right,
show.
anyway.
Yeah, you're not.
Right.
I mean, it's a different situation.
So, but that goes to a part of the difficulty in this case. Yeah, right. We've kind of established that. All right. So the reason I think they're kind of right is, look, can there be a situation where the people are discriminating against people who are overweight, who there's nothing they could do about it? The common idea is, well, dude, just shut your mouth and lose weight. Yeah. But a lot of people have, it's genetic, it's this, it's that, and it's not as simple as that, and it's a ridiculous, trite thing to say, right? And so people really might not be able to do anything about it, and they can do their job perfectly well, but some prick discriminates against them and says, oh, I told you to lose weight, buddy, you're out of here, right? When in fact, like this guy, for example, he says, look, I've been minding the children for 15 years, which it's an English way of putting it that kind of makes us uncomfortable. But like he's been doing this job for a long time. He's never had any problem doing the job. There's no reason why he should lose his job. It appears.
Yeah. And that's this particular case. This individual thinks that he was discriminated against because he is fat. He said, I got fired because they're saying I'm too fat, but I'm doing my job just fine. Right. But what the other can of worms that it opens is, will doorways need to be widened? Will furniture need to be changed? Like if we think about, let's say, for example, in the US, airplane seats. There are some individuals that have to buy more than one airplane seat. And I don't think that is actually regulated very well, because we've all been on an airplane where somebody probably should have had to buy more than one airplane seat, but they didn't. Yeah. And that can be incredibly frustrating. And at a certain point, it becomes a difficult conversation to have, because it's like, is it your fault? Should you be liable for twice as much payment? And the same thing in a business setting. Is it your fault that you are experiencing this kind of medical condition? Is this something where, the ADA requires that there are ramps in front of every business so that somebody in a wheelchair can get in. It can't just be stairs. The ADA says that that's not acceptable. Somebody in a wheelchair can't help that they're in a wheelchair. Now, some people that are morbidly obese can't help that they're morbidly obese. What kinds of accommodations are going to need to be made for them?
Also, really fast. So, I think that we're changing on this to some extent over time, because people are becoming so obese, and so many people are becoming obese, especially children. But we always end up talking about fault and obesity, because it does seem to be directly linked to something that you choose to do on a regular basis. And here's a slippery slope that it'll probably never go down this way, but there are many diseases that either there's a behavioral component to the disease, or that you exacerbate it with diet or behavior or lack of fitness. There are even mental problems as you age that could be mitigated to some extent through exercise. Why don't we adjudicate fault on other sorts of diseases that aren't obesity related?
On diabetes, for example, type 2 diabetes, which is directly linked to diet.
Or vitamin deficiencies, or if you injure your legs playing sports or something like that. There are other things as well.
Right, but just to be clear here, the European Court of Justice isn't saying, like, you can just come in and say, hey, I'm fat and give me disabilities. No, you've got to prove your case, et cetera. So, for example, there's some jobs they're very clear in pointing out that you can't do if you're obese, and if you can't do the job, well, then that's a sad day for you, right? If let's make up an example, you're a firefighter and you can't get inside the house and you can't rescue the people, then we can't have you as a firefighter, and it's okay to, quote unquote, discriminate on that basis, because I got to have you being able to do the job.
This is probably more likely going to be instituted. These kinds of precedents are going to be instituted when people think that they have wrongful termination suits on their hands. When they say, I got fired because my employer thinks I'm fat and gross. And I think that that's not fair. I've been doing my job perfectly acceptably. I can prove that I do my job well, but because my employer is prejudiced against my weight, he fired me. And I think that that's a completely understandable and completely fair place. The problem is, as we know with law is not just for a specific set of stipulations. If a precedent is set, we have to think about all of the different cases that that precedent could apply to.
Yeah.
And we have to have stipulations in place for those things. And this is just opening up a big can of worms that everybody's kind of scrambling to figure out.
This is two things
how to deal with
conservatives
it.
will hate. One, as happens, that at some point, it's possible that because the European Court of Justice has decided this, that a American court will look at it the same way, right? So the fact, my God, European justice is coming to America. And by the way, this vindicates, not that it needed vindication from rational people, why Michelle Obama's Get Healthy campaign makes sense for all of us.
Pro-business.
Because it's pro-business, right? I mean, we're all better off in the long run. And that said, if Jank is morbidly obese, then calm down. It's not 1 in 4 people. This is
it doesn't really affect 1 in 4 people at all. It's a much smaller percentage of people who are obese enough for it to affect. And then finally, the reason I'm on the side of the ruling here is that it's hard and it's tough to figure out, right? But that's why we have courts, right? So and as Cara pointed out, there'll be a couple of cases that are important that'll set precedent for how to figure it out. And as employers, we will adjust, and we will and it will turn out that sometimes you can't fire obese people just for being obese, even though it inconveniences you, and you've got to buy a larger chair, or you got to do this, or you got to do that. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? Because those people, they need jobs too, and oftentimes, despite the prejudices, it wasn't their fault.
And that's an important point, I think. That's probably one of the most important points to make. And this is me getting all super liberal on you guys, so you might not like it. But when we talk about, for example, I see a big correlation here, and roll with me for a second, between when we have conversations about violent crime. And we talk about the difference between a crime of passion or a crime in cold blood. And we talk about all these different ways that we can legislate and all these different ways that we can assign guilt and blame. And people say, oh, but that guy's just evil, versus this guy who had some sort of monkey on his back, or this guy who felt like he was in a pressured situation. I think that most people commit violent crimes because they feel some sort of pressure to do so. Most people commit violent crimes because they're experiencing some sort of mental stress, because for whatever reason, it's a very rare situation where somebody just kills because it feels good to them. Like, this just doesn't happen. And I think it's the same thing when we look at something like obesity. There may be a very small percentage of the population who becomes morbidly obese just because they really like food and they really don't like exercising. But most people who become morbidly obese, who are beyond some sort of clinical cutoff of being safe and healthy, there's something else going on. Like you said, whether it's genetic, whether it's linked to some sort of psychiatric illness, whether it's linked to whatever else could be going on. If we had the tools, we could probably fully understand that it's a more complicated clinical issue than that, and we need to look at these things with more nuance than just, oh, it must be your fault.
All that is true, but you way outlived me on the criminals. They're guilty.
Think so?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, she's not saying they're not guilty. She's just saying
totally not saying they're not guilty. I
or
just
that we
think-
shouldn't put them away.
Yeah,
but
No, but I definitely think that we need more rehab. It's the same thing with when I look at drug abuse, for example, or I look at criminal activity in individuals who are nonviolent offenders with the drugs. I think that probably putting them in the shoe, putting them in solitary, is not the best way to treat these individuals. They're not going to ever become functioning members of society. I think it's the same thing when we look at violent offenders. I think a lot of times if you take a psychiatrist and you dig into what's going on in that person's head before or during the commission of this violent crime, there's a lot of fucking baggage there. There's a lot of issues there. And where's the cutoff between somebody being clinically insane and somebody not?
You might be entirely right, but I mean, if they hurt someone I liked, I'm not interested in their fucking baggage.
Which is why they should still go to prison.
Right.
But I do think that we should be looking at how we treat our
do you
prisoners
think
differently.
you're morbidly obese just because of your giant broad shoulders.
I think that might contribute to it.
What's the cutoff then? 'Cause
But-
there's no way. Morbidly?
I know, it's
Really?
not crazy. It's some BMI
BMI
thing.
thing,
and
yeah.
Yeah, but like
saying,
where? So.
Yeah, and you really can't see my gut here. It is significant.
But then what about somebody who does weigh 500 pounds? They're just extra morbid.
I know, like,
yeah,
it's not fair that I've capped out, right? Like, I've got room to grow.
There's got to be another level.
And I'm not going to get any further credit for my growth, right? Okay, so now the live stream did have issues today. On the upside, we gave you a lot of show today, right?
Yeah,
yes, and so thank you for the live audience for sticking with us. We love you. You're right. You are the best audience in the world. And if you're a member, you're going to, of course, get the whole show anyway. That's the beauty of membership. And we have the limited time offer to the end of this month and the end of the year, of course. $1 membership for your first month. Everybody check it out. tytnetwork.com
And this show-
/holiday membership drive. Holiday
deal.
membership drive.
Holiday members, and this show is going up the whole show, right?
Yeah, the whole show goes up for just the next 2 weeks. We're doing that as well, so you can check it out on YouTube in its entirety, and then that stops at the end of the year as well. Okay, we love you guys. Have a great weekend, and bye-bye.
Hey, welcome to your Friday postgame. I'm Malcolm Fleshner with Steve-O and Dave Kohler, of course. Steve would not forgive me if I didn't remind you that we were recording this on Thursday. Day before. So that's why if maybe they cover something on the Friday show and then we cover it again, but don't make any reference to it, now you know why. All those
Oh my
weeks,
God! God
you were
forbid
in
they
the
live
dark.
with that confusion
Yes.
for
Yes.
3 seconds before they stop caring.
Some of us care about the members, Steve.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to open by talking about, Steve has an issue that he's been really concerned about the past couple of days and wants to talk about, which is relating the Tamir Rice killing to the case of, what was it?
George Stinny.
George Stinny.
But there's dissension today, right here on this panel. Dave wants to talk about the movie and fill in the gaps in the movie. And frankly, I don't, because I'm tired of it. I've watched it many times now.
This is not about you.
I know, but I don't want to talk about it, okay? So I'd rather talk about something else, but Dave wants to talk about it.
But I don't want to talk about it with grumps. This is the kind of
no,
situation where
I'm not a
the
grump.
bad guys win.
No, I'm not a grump, and I'm not a bad guy. I'm saying, Dave, fine. Let's talk about what you want to talk about. Fine. But you know what, members?
It's not.
I would love it if you guys commented below and told us if you enjoyed talking about the movie more, or if you enjoyed this totally true or totally bullshit with Steve. I'm not going to flash there more. It's okay. But anyway, Dave, you have the
Or
floor.
if you
Go.
prefer us arguing about what we're going to talk about more, we can do
No,
that.
I do one totally true or totally bullshit.
No, I refuse. We're going to do your thing. Go.
All right, so the movie, what's missing? Dave is going to fill us in.
This is an awful, awful way to have to do it.
It's not awful. Just do it. It's fine.
I've seen the movie 4 times now, and every time I watch it, I think to myself, but there's something missing.
Yes,
What?
thank
What
you.
is missing?
You're a professional. You're a true professional.
Can someone fill me in? Dave, do you have
So
any,
this
anything?
movie kind of jumped very quickly from Jank's early days all the way to when we were doing videos and he's trying to get on TV.
Early days, you mean not Jank's early days, but the early days of the Young Turks.
Jank's career early days in Washington and trying to get anything he could get. And then it jumped very quickly to, and then if you watch the documentary, you're thinking the only thing the Young Turks care about is how they're going to angle to get on TV. And there was a whole bunch, maybe like 3 or 4 years where TV was not even in the discussion. It had nothing to do with it. It didn't make the documentary because there was no video of it and it would have been boring. But I think members will be very interested to hear what was going on all those years when we were not just trying to get on MSNBC.
So what years are we talking about specifically?
So we're talking about 2002, which I talked about last week, all the way up to the end of 2005. So 2, 3, 4, and 5.
And this is a pivotal time in American history because it's when the Gulf War, the second Gulf,
right, and
the
when
Iraq
the
War
Bush
began.
administration started to really go down a path no other administration had ever done before. So I want to explain how consumed we were by radio with a little anecdote. So we weren't trying to get on TV. We're sending out CDs to radio stations all around the country and trying to get the Young Turks on.
And did you have
there.
some success last week? You had like Wichita
Yeah, we
or
got
whatever.
3 stations and it never got past that. But we didn't stop trying. So there was this opening in Sacramento. And Jank said, we got to go. We made a CD, we put it in the glove compartment. We drove up to Sacramento to see the program director. We got in the station, handed it to the receptionist. He wasn't there. We left. We went to play pitch and putt golf, had dinner, spent the night, and drove home.
So you never met with the
We
programmer?
never met with the programmer. But I'm just showing you the degree to which we went to try
And
to get this show
nobody
on the air.
filmed this
I see this
excursion?
bored look over there. No one filmed
Your
that
drive up
excursion.
I-5, you know?
Dave, I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm interested. Go ahead, keep talking.
No, I know you're not trying to be a dick.
So that was
you're
one
not.
example.
You're not that interested.
That was one example of a way you
Okay,
could dead end.
Now there's a whole other effort, a secret, untold history of the Young Turks. There was this radio group, the ones that started the Ed Schultz show. It was run by this guy named Tom Athens, who was the husband of Senator Debbie Stabenow. And they were starting a liberal talk network, not Air America, something else. I forget the name of it. Ed Schultz was their first guy, but that's because Ed was best buddies with some senator from North Dakota, I think Byron Dorgan, who of course knew Debbie Stabenow, so they got him in first and launched a really successful career for that guy. So Jank said, they're crazy, I gotta be next, the Young Turks have to be next. But in typical Young Turks history, they just wouldn't buy into Jank or the Young Turks. And they kept saying, yeah, we're interested, we're gonna do your syndication next. And they led us along for months and months and years. And this was nothing to do with MSNBC and all that. Jank was really, we got to get to Tom Athens. And I would ask him, did they call today? What did they say? Did you have your meeting? None of it's in the documentary. It's all very important. And it started the whole meme that exists in the Young Turks to this day. Why doesn't anyone respect us? Why can't we get on Bill Maher? Why can't we get Jank in the New York Times? And now we're a lot better now. We actually do get some of those things. But for years and years and years, that was the whine that came out of the Young Turks nonstop. It started way back then when we couldn't get even on this stupid little syndication. Turns out that husband of Deb Stabenow, first of all, I don't think they ever did anyone other than Ed Schultz. And then he got busted for being with a hooker. No,
Ed or Tom?
No, Tom Athens.
Oh.
It's public. It's not like I'm giving secret information here. So that was the end of that. So the next thing that came around was Air America, and we tried to get on that, and they were giving away millions of dollars like it was nothing. So we said, we got to be on it. We're the only national liberal talk show host on Sirius Satellite Radio, and they just wouldn't call.
So why do you think that the Young Turks was unsuccessful in persuading these radio program directors to get on board with the Young Turks phenomenon that was, ready?
Because there was no connections. It was just some guy, some Jank, some guy they perceived as a blowhard, just trying to do it all on his own. No one vouched for him.
Okay,
no
so you didn't have an
track record.
access. You had no means of, nobody to help you smooth the process for you to get in to meet people, to vouch for you, and you're not. It's only because you weren't part of the liberal establishment, whatever the liberal establishment
barely existed back.
Yeah, I mean it does exist, and there are Democratic donors and left-wing, Hollywood types. There is a community, and you guys were not in it.
But that community was much smaller in 2004 than it is now to begin with, and we were not in it. That's for sure. Even we called ourselves then the first national liberal talk shows. National because we were on Sirius Satellite Radio, so obviously it's everywhere. And it's
what
true.
about interviews? Jank you guys were able to land interviews
we were
with
successful
people of some notoriety or some,
Yeah, so the first interview ever, so Sirius, we were now under contract and they invited us to go to New York to do, I forget, some special, it might have been around an election or a State of the Union. And we wanted to impress them. We wanted to show them that we mean business here, and they were paying our expenses to go over to New York. So we scrambled through all the contacts we had to get some big name, and we got Mario Cuomo. And I don't know what the reaction to that is now. Half the people would probably say, who?
Well, I mean,
Andrew's father.
Yeah, Andrew and Chris.
Back
Cuomo's
then, he
father.
was still really big, and we were very proud of ourselves for landing Mario Cuomo.
He was supposed to be the 1992 president. He was supposed to be the Democratic candidate in '92.
Right, but he never really ran.
No.
And he gave a fantastic speech, I think in '88, I guess. Maybe it was '84 at this point.
It could have been 1960, but anyway.
But that was a big get. Like, it's not just we were proud of it, but Sirius was very impressed. That, okay, the Young Turks, they get Mario Cuomo, they mean business. So these little steps.
So how did you get Mario Cuomo if you couldn't get other people?
First of all, because he wasn't that big a deal. And we did have a contact that got him. Okay. We weren't completely out in the woods on our own. And so Air America, it went through two phases. The first phase where they were giving out tons of money and hiring Al Franken, and we couldn't get on. So I tried this gimmick. at one point where, say, look, if Jank said, look, if they're not putting us on, at least get me on as a guest onto Al Franken's show. And I go on a few times, and they like me. And maybe if Al Franken's out, they'll hire me to do the host temporarily. That's exactly what worked for TV years later. But it wasn't working for radio. So I said, all right, I'll do it this way. One day, strategically, at a specific time and a specific day, I called up Al Franken's producer, and I said, okay, I have Jank He's ready for today's interview. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, he's on the schedule. I arranged it with you, a few weeks ago, and we're ready. They had no idea what I was doing, of course, because I was making it all up. He said, she was so panicked and nervous. Let me get back to you. Let me check. They hung up. They got back to me and said, no, I'm sorry, he's not on the schedule. So no, thank you. We can't do it. And I said, so all right, let's reschedule. So I'll get back to you on that. And they never got back. And we were back to being nobody.
So do you think it actually would hurt you? Because nobody cared.
No one cared. And we were sure that we had no other way to do it. It was the last resort.
Yeah.
All right. Not only did no one care over there, but no one cared over here either. In the sense that the reason why I'm disinterested in this part of the story is that because we were actually disinterested, like our group of friends. Yeah, Jank and Dave, they're doing this thing, but it's kind of comical. We're not quite sure what they're doing. We don't know if they're gonna ever make it. It's a little bit of a joke. And we know Jank's a smart guy, and we like him, and he's fun, and we enjoy hanging out with him, of course. But I don't think any one of us really took him that seriously because of his ridiculous views on certain issues, at the time, and not too distant past at the time. So I didn't know where this is going, and I figured it was going to just kind of die, and then life goes on. Right. So that's why I feel detached now, because I was detached then, even though he literally lived like right down not down the street, but like very, very close to my house here in LA. And we get together and play sports and hang out. But in terms of the Young Turks as a business, I thought it was a joke. And I didn't think it was gonna go anywhere.
Until you heard he got Mario Cuomo.
Like the Mario Cuomo? Yeah. Yeah, so that's where we're at.
Yes, so I want to talk about another. First of all, these times where you were disinterested, I thought it was the best time that the Young Turks ever
also,
had.
I mean, what you're pointing out is he doesn't show in the movie all the fits and starts and the various tendrils that went nowhere.
Dead ends.
And that's
frustrations.
From a directorial decision, artistic, creative decision. It probably was a good one.
Of course, but the whole point of this is to fill people in who have seen the movie with all the stuff that didn't get in the movie. And the fans friggin' love it. The members love it. I know they do. They write back. They say they love it. I want to talk about another interview, which I thought was, for me, maybe to this day, the best interview ever. So we got invited. This whole Democratic, I guess it's with the Democrats in the U.S. Senate. They have a radio organization. They invited us to do radio shows from D.C. around the State of the Union. And
what year are we talking about?
Now we're talking about 2004.
Okay.
So January or February. And they gave us a little makeshift studio down in a basement in the Capitol building, with big, giant, empty room with nobody in it. And we were on our own with just 2 mics and a little device that connected to New York. And back then, you could actually just walk into the Capitol without security through any entrance. And that was after 9/11, so that was kind of cool. So we're down there. It's cold out. We're in this big empty room. We're on Sirius Satellite Radio. We were not sure that there was anyone listening still, even though we've been on for a year. There was a phone in the corner, and it had a number, and it worked. So we said, look, if you're listening, please call this number so we know you're out there. And maybe 15, 20 minutes later, finally someone called. So we were listening. And so we got this interview. We got it with David Brock. Now, David Brock, throughout the 90s, was a right-wing journalist. He slandered Hillary Clinton, hack, and he admits this. And then he had a change of heart. He came out. He realized he was being used by a right-wing propaganda machine. And he wanted to expose right-wing media hypocrisy, and he created Media Matters. He was just creating it at this time. He was not that big a deal. Now it's very hard to get an interview with him. Back then, we called him. He said, sure. He walked up to the Capitol by himself, holding a bunch of briefcases on a cold, blustery day. He just walked in, unaccompanied, no aides, no assistants. I met him at the door, and I said, I don't really need to show you around. You know this place a lot better than I do. He came down to that empty pit of a room.
Sure, he was really impressed.
But he probably was. He would do any interview, I guess, back then. And he sat down with Jank and Ben for like an hour and laid out the whole right-wing conspiracy and what his change of heart and what he realized and what he's doing now in careful detail, backed it all up. And I think to this day, that's basically that's the whole Young Turks show. All we've done in 10 years since is just build on that interview, because he laid out exactly what's going on in our politics and in the media. And this was in 2004, and with probably very little audience, as we've confirmed already. I thought it was still, to this day, the primo interview that we've ever done.
Are you going to track it down and make it available?
All right, that was interesting.
All right.
That was good.
Are you going to make that interview available to members?
Maybe I should try
that down?
We'd have to really track that. I think it is. All right, I'll look at that. That same day, while we were doing the show, in the room across the hall, Henry Winkler was there doing a arts celebration for, trying to promote federal funding for the arts.
He's the Fonz for you guys, so you know who we're talking about.
So we needed some interviews, so I went over to that room and I grabbed Henry Winkler and I asked him if he'd come over to the room across the hall and just do an interview. He had no idea what the hell he was getting into. But he came over, he was a really friendly guy, and he sat down, and Jank and Ben did an excellent job interviewing him. The three of them had so much fun. It was a great interview. And then, so what we did, we were nobodies. So we'd do these cheap marketing materials where we say, we're the Young Turks, national liberal talk show. We've interviewed Mario Cuomo, David Brock, and Henry Winkler. And then that turned into more senators, and those turned into governors and more famous people until we built up where we are. It's just a cap.
Yeah, sorry. So you build on those to get
build
more.
on it, you start
but that didn't help you get any radio stations.
No, we never got any more radio. That's it. We got 3 in 2002 or 2003 and never.
And when did they drop you?
They didn't drop us ever really until we just got out of radio.
Oh wow! So you were, till through 2005?
Something like that.
You're still on those
until we
stations.
finally got an Air America, which I'm not going to discuss in this post-game show. I'm going to talk about one final story, which should have been in the movie, but of course it couldn't have been, the robbery, because the robbery was fascinating. So we shared at the time the radio station. It's a tiny little one. We shared it. In the mornings, a gay channel came in, Harrison on the Edge. They were on Sirius Satellite Radio. They would do it in the mornings. And they pay it, Sirius paid, obviously, that's why we did it. They'd clear out in the midday and we'd move in. So one morning, his assistant, Harrison's assistant or producer, Doria, calls me up really early and says, Dave, something's wrong. Everything's a mess in here, and it seems disconnected. And, oh my God, everything's missing. And someone had come in overnight and stolen all the critical equipment. Not everything, not the computers. They stole the communications equipment that connects us with New York. So it seemed really deliberate, precise, and knowledgeable. And I said, all right, I'll be right over to check it out. And I called Jank and said, Jank, we got robbed. I'm going there. You should come too. So I went, and then Jank calls me, Dave, I can't come. Someone stole my car. That same night, his car got stolen. Coincidence? You decide. Can't be. So we called the police in. They came. They took fingerprints. It was a joke. They never cared. They never did it. There's only like 300 policemen in all of L.A. They had other things to do. But they went through the motions. Jank was sure that Tom DeLay was behind it. Tom DeLay was a big deal. Now we never talk about him. He was one of the most evil guys in American history. Now we forget about him. We never solved this robbery, but Jank got scared. He had to move to a hotel for a couple nights because they were targeting him, obviously. Stealing his car and ransacking his office. That night, so we were in, I believe, 719. Suite 819 had been ransacked, nothing stolen. And the robbers realized, shit, it's not 819, it's 719. They came down and ransacked us and stole our stuff.
What was the security that they had to get through? It was like kicking the door?
And those doors would always break, and you could just push it really hard and it would open. Just a flimsy lock. And we found Jank's car, the cops did. Jank was really hoping they wouldn't because his car sucked back then. He kept it for another 8 years or something. And
there was a Pontiac Grand Am.
The Grand Am that he talked about so much.
And there were clues in it. There was a business card with names and doctors' names and appointments. And the police, detectives, yeah, right, didn't care a shit about this. So we were frustrated. We had an intern at that time whose dad was a cop in Orange County. We thought of asking her for help. No, it's hopeless. But, we moved on. A little nervous ever since, but, and it was only the first of 2 robberies that we suffered. The second one, much less dramatic. That would have been a great story for the documentary, but no backup video, so that's it.
That did create a great buzz among our friends. You know, Jank got hit at work and at home, same night. Can't be coincidence. So I remember talking about this, and who could it be? Is it a disgruntled ex-employee, but didn't have any employees?
They didn't have
so it couldn't be any ex-employees either.
Young Turks doesn't have many ex-employees in general.
Yeah. Could it be? I thought Tom DeLay was a crazy. Cause I mean, of
course.
I said, come on, man, you're not that important. Tom DeLay doesn't know who the hell you are, right? And
my chief suspect was the parking attendant guy, because he's the one who knows where our office is, knows Jank's car, probably knows where he lives.
Why would he want Jank's car? It's a piece of shit.
No, he's connected with some gangbangers in L.A.
So, but why take the car and hit the studio and only take
the communication part?
Yeah, but that was the mystery of it all, right? They didn't take everything. And then they abandoned Jank's car. So it was more of a mischief than an actual, thievery.
Yeah.
So it was weird.
How long were you out of commission?
And why? Oh, just a couple of days. A series overnighted us, maybe a day or two. And insurance was fantastic. Can I admit this? Sure. So all the equipment belonged to Sirius Satellite Radio, but they got stolen. Sirius sent us a new one, and the insurance company sent us the check, and we pocketed it.
Oh my God! What year was this? Did the statute of limitations run?
Yeah, it was 1964.
Yeah.
I was not an employee of the Young Turks back then. My hands are clean.
No, we never. If Sirius had asked, we would have paid them.
Well, who paid for the insurance? Were you self-insured?
We did. Yeah, we paid the premium.
Then I think you get the cash. I think that's okay.
Yeah,
there's no crime here. Move along.
So when we pick this up next Friday, it'll be 2005, and maybe I'll be doing it solo, but I'll pick up more of where the Mad as Hell left off.
All right, it's not going to be next Friday.
No, it won't. So like two or 3 weeks from now.
Okay, so you want to talk about Tamir Rice?
Yeah, I do want to talk about that real fast. So yesterday was the 70th anniversary, or rather, 70 years ago, George Stinny was put to death. And George Stinny, for those who don't know, was a 14-year-old boy, a black boy, living in South Carolina, and he was accused of murdering 2 little girls. I think they were 11 and 8 years old. And the reason for the accusation against George is that George and his sister were the last people that the 2 white girls were seen with alive. And then the 2 white girls, they were looking for some kind of flower. And they asked George and his sister, have you seen these flowers? And they said, over there. And the girls left, and that was last anyone ever saw those girls. They were found with massive head trauma, both dead. So George Stinny's trial took 1 day. Everything from jury selection to jury deliberation and the verdict. It was 12 white men on the jury, found him guilty in 10 minutes.
And the only evidence they had was his coerced.
The only evidence they had against him was the coerced testimony where he said, yeah, I did it, because he was harassed by the cops.
Scared to death.
Yeah, there was no physical evidence whatsoever. There was no eyewitnesses. The defense lawyer that Stinny had didn't call anyone to the stand, so the defense presented no defense. And he was railroaded. The sad part of all of this, and there's so many sad parts, is that when he was being executed, he was, at the time, 90 pounds and about 5 feet 2 inches tall, and too small for the electric chair. So he walked into the chamber with the Bible under his hand, and they made him sit on the Bible to give him a little bit of a boost. The mask that they make you wear for the electrocution was too big. So, and something that goes around his wrist also. Everything was too big. He's just too small.
He was a child.
He was a child, and a small one at that. So when they sent the first jolt of electricity through his body, the mask flies off, and he's crying. And he's lost control of the lower portion of his face, and he's just drooling and crying. And then they send another jolt of electricity, and then a third jolt of electricity, and then he died. His family was basically threatened that they will all be lynched unless they all moved out. So they left what little belongings and wealth they had, and they had to run away. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and the thought of the state executing her for any crime, let alone for a crime that she did not commit. It just, I don't know, like this story has haunted me. And what happened yesterday that's important is that George Stinny was finally exonerated after all these years because it was a completely bullshit trial. And the reason why I bring it up is that I think this case is as strong a reason to abolish the death penalty as there is. Because at the time that they had the trial, I don't think the people thought that he didn't receive his due process. I think they felt he got justice. And that's how we feel right now when we dispense justice to these people, we being the royal we, not the three of us. But 50 years from now, 70 years from now, people are gonna say, my God, they used to put people to death back then. Back then, they didn't even have X kind of evidence. Like, for example, now we say, they didn't have DNA evidence. DNA evidence what could have easily proven so-and-so innocent back in the 60s or 70s, whatever, 80s even, 90s. But now we have DNA evidence, and that is the way we get a lot of people who are wrongfully convicted exonerated. Well, maybe in the future we're gonna have some other kind of evidence. Maybe like there's video evidence everywhere, or there's some other special kind of, not DNA, but some other thing that that's scientific that helps. Or maybe in the future the standard is that instead of having poorly trained, overworked public defenders defending death penalty cases, they have some sort of fund that a billionaire sets up or the government sets up where the city's top lawyers take on the case of death penalties because they realize this is a matter of literally life or death.
I'm guessing that one's not going to come to pass.
But the point is, okay, there are going to be standards where...
Or maybe we'll just say the death penalty was barbaric in general.
I hope that's the case.
Doing it.
But my point is, right now, it is barbaric. And there are so many things that go wrong. And when you have a bureaucratic process, of course there's going to be errors along the way. Of course. So we have to get rid of the death penalty. So a good friend of ours, he said he agrees that we should get rid of the death penalty, but not for people like the guy, like Adam Lanza, if he hadn't survived the Newtown shooting, where there's multiple eyewitnesses and it's a slam dunk, 100% case. My point to him was, no, you can't. You have to. They go together. Okay?
Well, George, what was his last name?
Stinny.
Stinny was a slam dunk case back then.
Back then, that's right. And my point is, if you allow this path of the death penalty being doled out, that's the price you pay. Okay. If you want the death penalty, the price you pay is that you get a couple of George Stinnys, and if you're okay with that, then I guess we're okay with it. The price of getting rid of the death penalty is that people like Adam Lanza, if he did survive, doesn't get the death penalty. And I'm okay with that, okay? I'm okay with letting Adam Lanza sit in jail for the rest of his life if that means no innocent person gets put to death. I think it's a fine price to pay.
Yeah, no disagreement here.
Yeah. And why did they do this? Well, first what I want to know is why did this happen now? Who was driving I'm sure they could go back and there are a lot of cases where they could exonerate people.
So George Stinny came from a small little town in South Carolina, and he is the youngest person ever executed in the U.S. There are lynchings that were unofficial that happened to younger people, awful, but he is the youngest person executed by the state. So a journalist in this town, it's like Al Kolu or something like that, a journalist just was curious and just dug into it. And the more he dug into it, the more he realized what a colossal, comical miscarriage of justice this was. So the more he looked, interesting thing. So there was some testimony that there was a deathbed confession by a white guy who was a relative of the two girls.
Of course.
Who on his deathbed said, yeah, that was me. It wasn't that kid that got blamed for it. And the killer's, the confessor's other relative was also a member of the jury. So it just goes to show you how absurd this whole thing is. Yeah.
Well, it's a small town, that's going to happen. But you could have swapped that person out for another white person in the town. It was going to be the same result.
Right. That's
it's not like that person was like, I better protect my uncle, Joe, who actually did this.
Yeah. And I don't know if that person even knew. The person who confessed didn't confess until he was on his deathbed. So that's my depressing story of.
So that's your upbeat Friday post.
Oh, and the way it relates to Tamir Rice is that, Tamir Rice is only 12, he's even 14, and it didn't take 10 minutes for 12 white guys to convict him of death. It just took 2 seconds for 2 white cops to say, bang, bang, you're dead.
Yeah, he got actually less justice.
Less justice, which is insane.
But he also was not forced to sit through a trial and then have to be in the
I guess he didn't have to cry
chair.
as being electrocuted repeatedly.
Yeah, it's a real upbeat. They're both really upbeat stories. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. So do we still have time for? Okay, all right.
A lot of time.
And now, after Steve has cheered you all up, we're going to move on to the fastest-growing segment, sweeping the nation. Totally true or totally bullshit with Steve-O and Malcolm Fleshner. Amira, give it to me. Gotta love it. All right. Gets me every time. All right, so we have 2 items that are topical. We're going like in semi-chronological order here, if you include Tamir Rice instead of George Stinny. Yeah. So we're coming up to the present day. We have a couple of news items we're going to cover in Totally True or Totally Bullshit. As you all know, the way we play this game is I will posit a perspective on a news item, and then I will ask my fellow panelists, totally true or totally bullshit. And as always, our motto on TTOTB is?
There's no nuance.
We don't do nuance. No nuance. Okay. First, let's talk about Cuba. Here's what I'm going to pose to you. As a result of the U.S. ending the embargo against Cuba and normalizing diplomatic relations, within 10 years, Cuba will have abandoned communism, embraced market reforms, and become just another third world Latin American/Caribbean nation in the U.S. sphere of influence. I ask you, is that totally true or totally bullshit? Dave Kohler.
I think that's the whole point. It's totally the only bullshit part is it's not going to take 10 years. Within 3 years, I think.
Do you think
so
the
totally
transition will be that quick to being just like Guatemala or Venezuela? Well, not Venezuela, but
the people will want to do it. The U.S. influence will want to do it. They're already semi-capital. Just they're cut off from the U.S. They're not cut off from any other country. So it's not that big of a step to become a market-oriented, free world country, as they call it. So yeah, I think it'll happen quicker than 10 years.
That fast? Okay. Steve, what do you think?
Agreed. Totally true. 3 years, I think, is a bit too ambitious, but certainly within 10 years. I think there, other than North Korea, which is next, no country is really communist anymore. I mean, even China, they're not communist. Who thinks China's communist? Right?
Yeah.
They're totally capitalist. They're in fact probably the most capitalist.
Well, they're crony capitalist. I mean,
well, is there any other kind? But yeah, I think with Cuba opening its doors, and everyone's going to want to facilitate this. Everyone from Major League Baseball to cell phone carriers to fast food restaurants.
Tourism industry.
Tourism industry. Boom, is gone. And it's going to happen really, really fast. And it makes total sense. I mean, Cubans in Cuba will like it. The U.S. will like it. The only people who won't like it are the Cuban exiles in South Florida who are still clinging to their hatred of what happened to them and their families under Castro's rule.
But if we return to or if it turns into a market-based democracy, won't they be able to go back and reclaim their land, at least buy it up or whatever? I mean, they can try at least, which they never could do. All these 50-some-odd years, they haven't had that opportunity.
I mean, other than that personal vendetta, I don't quite understand their anger. I mean, I get the anger that they've been wronged by this person in power, and they're against anything that helps that person in power. But the reality is that opening up Cuba really helps everyone, including their former and current enemies of the Castro family.
Now, don't forget, this Castro family, the ruling regime, does do human rights violations. They throw a lot of people in jail who shouldn't be in jail. So,
to be fair to them, they have less people in jail than we do.
Yeah,
yeah, but of course, it's a tiny country. You got to look at a whole. I don't know how their political prisoners compare to ours. I would imagine that they have more dissidents in jail than the U.S. does. And when there's a political prisoner in the U.S., we know about it. And we're a huge country. There's like 4 of them.
We do imprison millions of people for.
I know. This is different.
It's not political. But
it's so hard to point fingers, Dave. I mean, given how many people we put in jail for nonviolent, victimless crimes of drugs. The fact that we fucking love torture, this country is torture, the drone strikes, blah, 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 Guantanamo Bay. Like, I'm not putting my fingers at anyone.
Yeah, that's Cuba. That's Cuba. they gotta cut down on those human rights violations at Guantanamo.
So, no, the question is, will there be a movement, the effective movement to preserve some of Cuba's
I think there will. I think the two things that will
architecture
remain,
of the cars.
No, not the the architecture of the car, but that's the cars. That'll become part of the tourist appeal of Cuba. No, so they have to keep that. They have the old cars now out of necessity, and they will become a selling point, as it already is. But it'll be more run in a capitalist way. But I think the two things that in Cuba will remain are the education system and the healthcare system, which are two things they're really proud of and are the real great achievements of the revolution. And so it'll probably become more like Costa Rica, but I could certainly see a lot of Americans moving to Cuba to retire there, just like they do in Costa Rica.
Sure, I can see.
And because they have very good healthcare and they're very well educated. So I don't think it's going to become as much of just a satellite, shithole like Guatemala. But I think if they do it right, they could retain some of the real advantages of the revolution without, turning into just a banana republic like it used to be.
Yeah, Cuba has a lot of potential. And maybe like 20 years before the revolution, there was a reformist period in Cuba where it became a really cool country. It was a great country. By the way, my mom, and her parents, when they had to escape the Nazis, the only country that would take them was Cuba. So that was in like 1952 or something like that.
So, but that was a different regime, obviously.
Yes,
it was Batista regime.
Right. But Batista had a good period, and then he left power, and then he came back as a jerk. That's interesting. So a few months ago, I met this Cuban guy at the LA Chess Club, and he's Cuban. He got out of there, and for a while, I was really full of curiosity to talk to him and find out how he left and what it was like there. When I finally did, he said, "Oh no, I've been living in Mexico for the past 9 years." He knows less about Cuba than I do, I think. So that was kind of.
I think what's interesting about the reformist period you're talking about, the reason that they retrenched was because they got nothing from the American government. To ease sanctions. They said they were trying to. They released political prisoners and they tried to warm up, cozy up to the United States government. They got nothing but the cold shoulder from us. So they were like, all right, fuck it then.
Are you trying to blame us, Malcolm? I'll tell you this right now. We are awesome. We are not awesome.
I'm in the Blame America First party. That's I'm running. I'm going to be a presidential candidate for the Blame America First, and I'm going to get all the Democrats' votes.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
All right, so the next one. Okay, this is hot off the presses. It's about the Sony hack. Sony has pulled the movie The Interview from theaters after North Korean hackers allegedly accessed the company's computer system and then made vague threats about terrorist attacks on theaters showing the film. Sony should not have pulled the film, however, because capitulating sends a dangerous message about freedom of expression and a foreign government's capacity to censor the U.S. media. Totally true or totally bullshit, Steve-O?
Totally bullshit. And this is where I totally disagree with Jank and Anna yesterday, because they're both saying, no, you should not have pulled it. You should not have capitulated to the North Koreans, blah, blah, blah. Of course they should have. Of course. Sony was hacked. Sony is a private company. It's not some sort of like nation that needs to stick up for its rights. They accessed every one of their sensitive data. They know where they live. They know where they work. They know everything. They know how many children they have. They know everything. Are you fucking kidding me? I mean, I wouldn't want to risk anything if I'm Sony. I pull it. I pull it. It's crazy talk. If James Franco or Seth Rogen get assassinated, or there's even an attempt to hurt them in some capacity, it could destroy Sony as a company. They're already being sued by their own employees. I mean, it's a freaking nightmare. It's an absolute epic disaster. While all of this is happening, Sony is supposed to like wave a flag of patriotism and democracy and say, I will not be bullied. Yes, I will be bullied. If someone hacks in and takes all of our information, posts it online, they know everything about my family, and then make further threats, I'm pulling it.
So you're talking about threats to Sony and all the sensitive private personal information the hackers have on Sony. You didn't mention anything about the thousands of moviegoers. Would you have been worried about their safety?
Well, that's part of Sony's price.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
financially, because if Sony plays the movie, terrorists attack the theater and kill people, and those people sue Sony, that's it for Sony.
Yeah.
So they really didn't have a choice.
Yeah, and for the theaters, that's even a bigger no-brainer. Well, I'm definitely pulling if I'm a theater owner because what? It's the only movie I have. There's plenty of other movies to show.
Well, if you want to get nuanced,
we should get Mad as Hell to be shown in all the theaters.
The theaters started pulling it
Yeah.
first. Sony kind of didn't have a choice,
Yeah.
so they took this route. In some ways, the easy decision. But also, I don't know much about what's going to happen. But can they release this movie 3 months later? It'll be the biggest hit in history. I mean, with the publicity they're getting.
That's true.
And then all the scare will be, it'll be a lot more calm. And
It's like, can they do it without the North Koreans knowing?
Yeah, so I mean, that's an interesting point. Yeah, it's not like they pull it now, they can never put it back. Maybe in a year they release it and it's crazy good, and like it does really, really well. But the president, the co-president, Amy Pascal, like I know her personally, and I feel so bad for her.
Yeah.
Those emails were so damaging and so embarrassing. And to be honest, I don't even think they were that bad. She's kidding around with someone else about how our black president likes black movies, and then the email became a joke where they were listing every single black movie. I mean, it's not like she was saying he's lazy or he's a Kenyan or he's a bad guy. They're just fucking around.
Dumb. It was just dumb jokes.
It was dumb jokes, but we've all made dumb jokes.
I mean, if you wanted all your emails made public, my emails, no, bad.
Bad.
Pull the picture.
Well,
I'm going to North Korea.
One of our friends said that, but it's true, and I know it. There's no privacy in your work emails. You don't have to hack them. They could very easily be exposed.
What?
Who's in charge of IT here? I need to get everything expunged.
Yeah. I need a clean
I'm
sweep.
amazed also. We struggle here with money and everything. Sony, they put $100 million in this movie to make it and market it, and they said, forget it. Let's just not do it.
You got to walk away. But that happens. They make movies that don't, tank, and
that's part
without
of business,
the North Koreans' assistance, so they can do that on their own. See, what I wanted to highlight, I think it's bullshit also, but for another reason, which is there's this notion like, oh my God, it's the first time a foreign government is going to, censor our media, and it's really the first time that a foreign government that we're opposed to censors our media. Our media is constantly being censored in favor of our friends. You don't get a straight story about Saudi Arabia from the American media when they're talking about beheadings. Nobody brings up Saudi Arabia.
Yes, unbelievable.
So there's all sorts of friendly governments. Israel, you don't get a straight story about Israel in the American media. But with regard to movies specifically, anytime there's a big budget military themed movie like Zero Dark 30, or a battleship, the Defense Department actively consults with the movie makers and only grants them access to use footage of the American military if they get final say on how the American military is depicted. So we already have the American government actively censoring movies that come out in the United States. So it's not like governments it's complete free expression here in the United States, and American media companies they're not subject to us. No, it's mostly either self-censorship or actively engaging in and welcoming the censorship.
Asking Sony to be some sort of intrepid defender of free speech and the ones to take a stand against North Korea is crazy talk. No way should Sony do that. No way. North Korea, they've been known to kidnap people all the time. They kidnap South Korean and Japanese actresses and all of the stuff. If I'm a Sony executive, I'm shutting this shit down. Like I can't even tell you how fast I'm shutting this down.
The other
gone.
reason that you may not agree with Sony is you might think none of this is credible. Like the chances of any of these disastrous scenarios that you're talking about occurring are 0.01%. You might think that.
Yeah.
So why shut this down? Nothing's going to happen.
Well, but it's also like some crazy person might go and shoot up a theater just because they're inspired by all this and because they want to be part of this.
Well, Hinckley. Yeah.
No, but Dave, it's not just an idle threat. So if someone said, I'm going to destroy Paramount if they release, or rather, I'm going to destroy Disney if they release a Star Wars film, Disney's going to say, fuck off, and they're going to release it, right? But what if right before I say that, I hack into Disney and take all their shit, scare the hell out of them, and then I say, by the way, if you continue, I will kill someone. They're going to shut it down, of course they will.
That's somebody who really didn't like the prequels. I mean, you got to be really, really unhappy about episode 1. to do that.
So this is, look, in terms of the physical threat, is that credible or not? Maybe not, okay? And definitely not if it's just on its own. But you couple that with what they've actually done on the cyber side, all it takes is one guy. It doesn't take like a bomb or the Twin Towers coming down. It just takes one guy with one gun at one theater that shows this movie to kill one person, and holy shit, that's it. That's it. So I shut it down.
Yeah, I mean, we don't actually even know that it's the North Koreans who did this. That's just sort of speculation.
Yeah,
So-
that's current leading theory.
Well, obviously, we need to invade a country somewhere in the Middle East for it.
By the way, your point about movie censorship was really good, so I get why this whole thing was a setup so you could make that point.
Yeah,
but
well-
it was worth it because you made a very good point.
No, but you guys also made good points that I hadn't, thought about. And
Oh, no, you made good points.
Oh,
you made the best point. You're the best. But it was a really good point, though.
all right, I think that's it for us. Have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in and sticking with us this whole time. Appreciate it. And as always, right, Steve? Stay strong.